The crestfallen Weasley twins each held out a hand to Esmeralda. Thinking they wanted help getting up, she reached back, but with a sharp smack, her friendly hand was slapped away. "What's that for?" she said, rubbing the reddened skin. "Potion homework. Transfiguration homework," George finished. "This is compensation for the emotional harm you caused us," they said in perfect synchronous unison. Esmeralda had the sudden, absurd impression that they'd spoken like that since before they were born. She shrugged and tossed her backpack at Fred, figuring they could find what they needed themselves. She didn't really agree with copying homework. She'd been like that once, but the twins always had their own methods. They rifled through the bag, found the right exercise books, and bent to work. They copied everything furiously, then swapped papers and completed both assignments at once to save time. 2 people, 1 job. Esmeralda took a book off the couch beside her instead, How Your Spells Should Hit Your Opponent. She'd found it tucked away on a dusty shelf in the library and borrowed it because the title amused her. After a few pages, she saw why it had been gathering dust. It was nonsense. Much better, she'd decided, was the battered 5 years ODOLs and 7 years NEWTs sitting in another corner. It actually contained past written exam questions and read like Hogwarts' ultimate practice guide. The common room was thinning. The fire in the hearth popped and glowed. Fred, rubbing a sore wrist, muttered, "I'd rather stay with Filch than write a potions essay." He passed the finished copy back to Esmeralda. "Lovely, annoying Filch," George added with a dramatic frown. "Compared to Snape, Filch is nothing." Esmeralda snapped the book shut. "Be grateful you have homework to copy," she said. "How is that copying?" "It's referencing," George protested. "It's to spark ideas and guide thought," Fred added. "We're not wasting our lives on pointless assignments." "If you sounded any more sincere, I might believe you," she thought, rolling her eyes. She massaged her neck and teased. "So what do you find meaningful? Cozy chats with Filch? Hiding in corridors to scare Harry? Turning Ron's doll into a giant spider?" The room went quiet. Fred's grin flattened. "We were only trying to prank Ron," he said. "We misjudged the scale." George shifted awkwardly. The idea of Ron's doll suddenly becoming a massive crawling thing clearly haunted them. The thought of Ron encountering any spider, especially a large one, was apparently something to be avoided at all costs. "Why don't we go for a night stroll?" George offered, suddenly changing the subject. Fred, eyes bright, piled on. "Late at night, no one about, an ancient castle. Esmeralda, you don't fancy it." It was an invitation, thinly veiled and persistent. Esmeralda shook her head. "I'm not going to get caught up in any more trouble. I'll behave for a while." "Next time," Fred said. "Not tonight, not tomorrow, but next time," George added, as if explaining to a child. "You got caught already once. Going back so soon?" she said. "Filch'll be watching you." At the mention of Mrs. Weasley, both twins sobered. "Charlie won't tell on us. He's not Percy," George mumbled, unsure. "You two can talk about losing points," Fred said, wagging a finger at Esmeralda. "But you, Esmeralda Twister, you don't get that right." "I earned back all the points I lost," she protested, though the protest sounded thin. She had lost some points recently and hadn't quite recovered. Fred spread his hand, counting off. "Let's not mention the fight. We'll skip that." Esmeralda nodded. That was a collective deduction anyway. The twins continued, finger by finger. Restricted section after hours. Madam Pince told Professor McGonagall, points lost. George bent down his thumb. Using magic in empty classrooms and corridors, Filch caught you, points lost. Fred lowered his index finger. Neglecting the greenhouse because you were daydreaming. Professor Sprout docked points. She liked you, and you disappointed her. George's next finger went down. Esmeralda hung her head. She genuinely hadn't cared much for plant care. In the dungeons, talking back to the professor, Snape docked points more than once. Fred emphasized more than once, like it was a flourish. They rattled off infractions like a roll call of shame. Esmeralda stared at the carpet. If she'd been any more embarrassed, she'd be trembling. "Want us to keep going?" the twins asked. "No, no need. Please stop," she managed, clenching her fists. "Do you know what the other students call the 3 of us?" Fred asked, mischief returning. "The 3-point deducting titans," George supplied. Esmeralda had no close friends, and she'd been alone in a lot of her decisions. She'd planned to earn the points back the twins had lost, but now, after a quick reckoning, she realized things were worse than she'd thought. Her own deductions made her almost as much of a liability. What did that prove? That Fred and George were unsurprisingly unbeatable. "I advise you to give that up," Fred said. "Since your detention with Professor McGonagall, you've let yourself go," they finished together. No one had to spell it out. Esmeralda hadn't lost a single point before that detention. After it, things slid downhill. "I'll control myself," she promised, though a promise felt small compared to action. "By the way, Halloween's coming. Have you any ideas for a costume?" Fred asked. "We're planning to make 2 pumpkin heads," George added. "Pumpkin heads?" Esmeralda blinked. She'd been at Hogwarts for 2 months already, and the orphanage had never taken the children to Halloween parties. Her only Halloween memory was the phrase, "trick or treat." She knew Hagrid grew enormous pumpkins. She'd seen them, and had even joked that Hagrid's fertilizer would make him rich in the Muggle world. It took a moment for her to connect the dots. "From Hagrid, of course," Fred said. "He grows a lot." "We've already asked him," George finished. They were planning jack-o'-lanterns then. Hagrid's pumpkins would be perfect. George turned hopeful. "And if you don't have anything, how about dressing up as Jack with us?" Another invitation, and this time it sounded warmer. Esmeralda looked into the twins' eager faces, the firelight catching in their hair, and for a moment she almost said yes. 22. Halloween Eve. In the days before Halloween, the Great Hall had become an owl depot. Flocks of birds swooped in at breakfast, dropped off parcels for eager students, and wheeled back out again. When the air raid was over, the floor was carpeted with feathers and scattered packages, costumes, masks, and every sort of decoration. Ada had decided she might as well join the fun this year and team up with the Weasley twins for a prank. She hadn't decided what to wear yet. Ready-made costumes were probably expensive, and she saw no point in buying a one-night outfit when money was tight. In the end, the twins suggested the simplest thing, a jack-o'-lantern. It was cheap and needed only a large pumpkin. Ida asked what people usually dressed as. Ghosts, ghouls, zombies, demons, inferi, anything scary, the twins added. None of those appealed to her. Ghouls were hideous and would ruin her image. Zombies didn't suit her idea of beauty. In her head, they were always shabby and in dress robes, which she couldn't pull off. She considered an ancient crone, but the thought of making herself look 100 years old made her unhappy, and being a witch at Hogwarts wouldn't frighten anyone. Then she thought of vampires. She'd seen Bram Stoker's Dracula and liked the idea. Pale, noble, alluring. Ida fit the look. Pale skin, a certain cold charm that had kept her surrounded by smitten admirers since she arrived at school. Fred was the first to speak up. "I think it would suit you, but do you have a dress robe?" he asked. "Or something like one," George added. "It doesn't need to be fancy, just wearable after a few alterations." "No." Ida touched the sleeve of her school robe. She rarely bought clothes. She expected to grow taller, and she didn't want to waste money on things that might not fit next year. If she had been willing to flirt with her admirers, she could certainly have borrowed a dress robe, but she considered that beneath her. The twins knew this, so they didn't press it. "Then we'll alter your school robe and use makeup to make you paler," Fred said. Ida didn't like the idea of tampering with her robe. It had already been torn once, and the memory had bothered her. Buying and altering a second-hand robe might work, but it was probably too late to get one made. In the end, she shrugged and went along with whatever they decided. "Are there extra pumpkin heads?" she asked. "If Hagrid grew a lot, we could all be jack-o'-lanterns." "Hagrid grew loads," Fred promised. "No problem." On Halloween Eve, the corridors smelled of roasted pumpkin. The scent relaxed Ida more than she expected. After 2 months at Hogwarts, the castle felt more like home. Thousands of jack-o'-lanterns swung from the rafters of the Great Hall, all grown by Hagrid, who'd even cultivated a few giant pumpkins for pumpkin carriages. Students had transformed themselves into every bizarre, frightening thing they could imagine. Hogwarts felt like a real night parade. By the time they were ready, the twins had their pumpkin heads on. Though their faces were hidden, their excitement came through in their voices. Ida stood to one side with a pumpkin under her arm and another jack-o'-lantern in her hand, gifts from Hagrid. "So you two plan to scare people here?" she asked, incredulous. "The feast's about to start, and this corridor is a shortcut to the Great Hall, Fred explained, fussing with the pumpkin head. They'd chosen the spot carefully after several days of planning. Scout for us, George told Ida. If you see any younger students, shout. Not big crowds. Pick on smaller groups, Fred added. Easier. Ida thought the twins were cowardly, but she went along and moved ahead to scout. Several big groups passed, and she let them go. Just when she began to doubt the twins' choice of ambush point, 2 first-year girls appeared, giggling and chatting. Ida hurried back, put on her pumpkin head, and signaled the twins. Fred kept a sharp eye on the girls while George helped Ida get into position. As the pair rounded the corner, Fred dashed out first. George and Ida followed, flailing their limbs and making odd, high-pitched noises. The 2 girls, still talking about the feast and the food, were taken by surprise. They jumped back, looked terrified, and then tripped, landing in a heap in front of the trio. The surprise worked, at first. The girls' tears and fear faded quickly as common sense returned. Ida reached down and helped them to their feet. The twins produced a few pieces of candy and handed them over. It was Halloween, after all, and the girls forgave the fright with a giggle. One of them even gave Ida a playful pinch as a parting gesture. The 3 of them went on to prank a few more unsuspecting students, and Ida discovered she enjoyed the mischief much more than she expected. No wonder the twins loved pranks. After a while, they removed their pumpkin heads and began to head toward the Great Hall. Ida led, light on her feet, thinking of toffee apples. The house elves' food had suited her. She'd gained 5 pounds in 2 months and even grown a little taller. The sickly pallor she'd arrived with had improved. The twins lagged behind reluctantly, but soon they were all together again, laughing as they went. They reached the Great Hall and had barely sat down when plates of Halloween fare began to appear. The toffee apples glittered on the platters. Ida was about to bite into one when the doors flew open and Argus Filch came stumbling in, frantic. Professor, it's terrible. A student's been attacked." 1,000 paper bats fluttered and circled the walls and ceiling, making the candle flames inside the pumpkins dance. Apples were skewered on bamboo sticks and dipped in toffee syrup, some rolled in nuts to finish. Ida thought they looked very much like candied hawthorns from back home in the East. Golden trays held pumpkin pie and roasted pumpkin seeds. For drinks, there were iced pumpkin juices and steaming mugs of apple cider, which Ida found particularly delicious. At the teacher's table, the professors were enjoying the feast. Professor Dumbledore chatted quietly with Professor McGonagall. The Halloween celebration should have been perfect until Filch burst into the Great Hall. He staggered in, face pale with terror, and hurried over to Dumbledore, hands on his knees from the run. The underground classroom. A student is lying in the underground classroom. "He's been attacked," Filch gasped. The noisy hall fell silent at once. For a heartbeat, some students wondered if it was a prank. Halloween, not April Fools, but Filch would not joke about something like this. Then terrified screams broke out. Panic rose like a swell, and students' cries threatened to drown out the enchanted ceiling. The teachers stood, trying to calm them, but it was Dumbledore's firm command, "Silence," that finally steadied the room. Fear still hummed in the air, though. "Students of all houses, under your prefect's leadership, return to your common rooms at once. Do not go out. Older students, look after your younger companions," Dumbledore announced. Charlie Weasley stood and raised his wand. A flash of light issued from its tip. "Everyone, follow me. Don't get separated. First years, don't be afraid. Stick close to me." Charlie organized the Gryffindors, and the 6th and 7th year prefects placed younger students in the middle of each group for protection. Prefects from the other houses marshaled their students as well, and several teachers escorted the groups to ensure everyone returned safely to the dormitories. Once the students were leaving, Dumbledore led the remaining professors to follow Filch to the scene. A student attacked at Hogwarts. Such a thing had not happened in years. Dumbledore's eyes, visible behind his half-moon spectacles, were unusually stern. He could not afford to lose his composure. He had to stay rational. Filch guided them to an abandoned classroom deep beneath the school, a place seldom passed and easily overlooked. Madame Norris had been the one to find the student. The room was cold and unused. Dumbledore flicked his wand and the torches sprang to life. banishing the gloom. A boy lay on the stone floor, pale, eyes shut, with no obvious outward wounds. Professor Sprout stepped forward, alarmed. The boy was one of her Hufflepuffs. "Daniel, Daniel," she whispered as she knelt. He did not respond at first. Dumbledore bent to examine him. "Pomona, he's all right. He's fainted." He touched his wand to the boy and murmured a spell. Daniel Bell's eyelids fluttered, and he slowly came to. When he woke, he was terrified. He scrambled back from Sprout as if she were the danger, retreating until he was pressed into the corner, curling up with his knees to his chest. Daniel Bell, it's me," Sprout soothed. Seeing Dumbledore and Pomona calmed him a little, he began to sob softly, small and frightened. At Dumbledore's signal, Snape stepped forward with a bottle of potion and handed it to Sprout. She forced it down Daniel's throat. Gradually, his color returned. "Thank you, Severus," she said. Snape waved it away and fell back to the others. Dumbledore crouched to meet Daniel's eyes. "Daniel, tell me, how did you come to be here?" "I don't know. I don't remember," Daniel whispered, panic rising in his voice. He tried to recall the day, and the memory slipped away, making him more frightened. "Can you tell me what you did today?" Dumbledore asked, gently stroking the boy's back. I don't remember anything," Daniel insisted, the fear in him becoming almost tangible. He could not recall the day at all. Dumbledore exchanged glances with McGonagall and Snape. Turning to Sprout, he asked, "Pomona, has he behaved oddly lately?" Sprout frowned and considered. "No, Daniel's a quiet boy, never one to show off, nothing out of the ordinary. I'll go to the common room in a moment and ask the students who know him best. Pomona, you and Poppy take Daniel to the hospital wing. He needs rest and treatment now," Dumbledore ordered. Then he looked at the other professors. "Everyone else, return to your students and help calm them." Sprout and Madame Pomfrey lifted the still trembling Daniel and left. The other teachers followed, one by one. Snape lingered only long enough to exchange another look with Dumbledore, then left, though not straight back to the Slytherin common room. He headed instead for Benedict Fooley's office. McGonagall stayed behind. "Albus, she began. "His injuries aren't severe," Dumbledore finished. "It seems more psychological, mental shock, and the memory loss is the most immediate concern." McGonagall's face hardened. Such a vicious attack. If Filch hadn't found him, how long would he have lain in that cold room? "Yes, that's why the attacker chose such a place. Remote, unlikely to be seen. The longer the boy remained undiscovered, the harder it would be to trace whoever did this." Dumbledore's gaze swept the quiet classroom. "Do you think a professor could have done this, or did someone from outside the school get in?" All the teachers were at their tables. Because it's Halloween, everyone arrived early. "I don't suspect the students," McGonagall said. "I lean toward an intruder, someone who somehow entered Hogwarts." "I have suspicions," Dumbledore admitted, "but nothing verified yet." McGonagall hesitated. She did not want to consider a colleague capable of such a thing. "If it were true," she began, voice tight. "Albus, if it is someone from the school, I will see to it myself." "I hope it is not," Dumbledore said quietly. "Right now, Minerva, go back to Gryffindor. I heard you've been having trouble with 3 first years recently." He was referring, of course, to the trio led by Ida, with Fred and George often in tow, 3 first years notorious for losing points. McGonagall could do little more than sigh. "I only hope those 3 behave themselves today and don't cause any more trouble." Anxiety still clung to the students who had left the Great Hall. A pupil being attacked on school grounds made it hard for anyone not to be afraid. Charlie Weasley led the way back with his wand out, flanked by a few older students who also had their wands ready, loudly reassuring the younger Gryffindors. "Don't be afraid. The professors will find whoever did this. Trust Professor Dumbledore. He's the most powerful wizard in the world." Under the guidance of the older students, the line moved slowly forward. A few of the more timid children couldn't hold back quiet sobs. Several older girls pushed through the crowd to comfort them, and the crying subsided beneath their gentle words. Ada, Angelina, and Alicia were sheltered in the middle by Fred, George, and Lee Jordan. The 6 of them were surrounded by others at the center of the Gryffindor group. The house had put all the first and second years together so they wouldn't get separated, and so older students could protect them more easily. Percy really does care about you two, Ada said to the twins. Percy Weasley had just pushed through the crowd to check on Fred and George. Satisfied they were all right, he went back to his side of the line, but not before warning them to stay put and follow the others straight back to the common room, or he would tell Mrs. Weasley. The twins were surprised by Percy's sudden display of concern. The officious, annoying brother had actually been worried about them, even if his tone was as insufferable as ever. Maybe he's had a change of heart. He finally realized how great we are. Fred and George spoke in perfect unison. Deep down, they liked that their brother cared, but they were too stubborn to show it. I think he just didn't want you two making trouble while everyone's panicking, Lee Jordan muttered. The twins, unable to resist, told Lee in unison, "Shut up and we'll still be friends." They teased, genuinely tempted to clamp his mouth shut and give him a bit of inhumane care for his tattling. Who would dare attack someone at Hogwarts? Angelina asked, holding Alicia's hand for courage. She was young and still hopeful. Experience would harden that a little. I don't know, Ada said, but whoever did this must have a lot of nerve and determination. In her head, she was already trying to link the attack to Snape and Fury. It wasn't that she cared about the drama, she cared about her own safety. She hoped desperately this had nothing to do with them. If it did, she'd have to be extremely careful from now on. I believe Professor Dumbledore will sort it out, George said. Even if he is an old sweet tooth, he's got to be omnipotent, Fred added, and they high-fived. Angelina and Alicia nodded. Lee agreed as well. Ada watched everyone's unreserved trust in Dumbledore and wondered, not for the first time, if he'd been to the Far East and learned some incredible magic. Everyone she knew seemed to trust him without question. Do you know who was attacked? Ada asked, trying another angle. Perhaps she could learn something from the victim. Apparently, it was Daniel Bell, a fifth-year Hufflepuff, Lee whispered. I heard the Hufflepuffs talking about it. Ada blinked. She'd asked the question casually, not really expecting an answer, and here was Lee, the human megaphone, with one. He'd be wasted if he didn't go into broadcasting later. Is that confirmed? George asked, lowering his voice like they were holding a secret meeting. As far as we can tell, his roommate said he didn't come to class in the afternoon, and when the others came back to the dormitory, they couldn't find him, Lee said. They hadn't seen him since the afternoon. During the feast, Filch announced a student had been attacked, and they all thought of Daniel. He passed on the Hufflepuff gossip he'd overheard. Ada thought it through. If Daniel had been missing since the afternoon, then the attack might have happened well before the feast. That made her even more uneasy. Why would a quiet, unremarkable boy be targeted? From what Lee said, Daniel seemed like the sort of person who didn't attract attention. The motive, if there was one, was baffling. At last, the mass returned to the Gryffindor Tower. The fat lady opened the portrait without asking for the password the moment she saw them. The older students let the younger ones through first. Only after the first and second years had filed in did the rest follow. The common room filled quickly, armchairs taken, faces slackening as the tension eased a little. Charlie and a female prefect called names and checked the lists by year to make sure everyone had come back. After the roll call, most people went up to their dormitories. A few lingered in the common room. Ada and the Weasley brothers, once the bustle had thinned, settled into 2 armchairs near the fireplace. Charlie and some older students stood by the doorway, keeping casual watch so no one came in or out. They divided guard duty into 3 shifts. Charlie's group were on first watch, to be relieved later that night. They whispered among themselves, equally concerned. After all, the only reliable danger they'd learned to expect at school was a defense against the dark arts teacher, changing every year. Charlie glanced over at Ada and the twins by the fire. The 2 mischief makers weren't running about. They stayed close to Ada, and that relieved him. Ada hugged a cushion and asked the twins, "Have you heard of any other attacks at school?" "No," Fred said. Charlie didn't say anything else. Bill didn't mention anything either, and Mum and Dad, well, they wouldn't. George added, "You seem especially worried about this," they said. Ada, usually cool about everything, was acting oddly today. She wasn't going to tell them about Snape and Fury. She didn't want to drag them into it, so she kept it vague. "Just a little," she answered. leaning back. A student was attacked. Aren't you worried? Worried, yes, but not like you, Fred said. You're overdoing it. When did you get as timid as Percy? George teased. You've been strange lately, never quite yourself, always looking worried. The twins were clever in their own way. They didn't study much, but they noticed things. They knew Ada was hiding something. Since she didn't want to talk, they didn't press. Friends sometimes keep small secrets. At first we thought you were ill, Fred said. It just felt off, George added. Then both their faces flushed bright red, like freshly boiled lobsters. Ada's cheeks matched their color. Silence settled over them, a hush more unsettling than any noise. The quiet seemed to make their sudden concern even more obvious. The scariest thing is when the air suddenly goes quiet, Ada thought, and the scariest thing is when friends suddenly show they care. Ada, thick-skinned but relieved to break the awkwardness, forced a smile. I've just had some worrying things on my mind, but I can't tell you yet. She'd be the first to speak up, to ease the moment. Fred and George sat down on either side of her, Fred on the left, George on the right. Fred rested a hand on her shoulder. Ahem, if you don't want to talk now, that's fine. Tell us when you're ready. George placed his hand on her other shoulder. We're your friends. We've got your back. Even if the shield's a bit small, it's still a shield, they said together, patting her a little too forcefully. Their clumsy warmth made Ada's chest ache with gratitude. She felt lucky to have people to rely on. Her voice muffled by the cushion, she managed, I'm sorry, Fred, George. When I know more, I'll tell you right away. In the headmaster's office, silver vessels breathed thin plumes of smoke that curled and blurred the lines of Dumbledore's face. He sat behind the desk, long fingers raking through a bowl of sweets without ever plucking one. He still could not fix the exact time of the attack. Even as headmaster, with privileges that reached into many corners of the school, he could not know every movement of every person. Not even the founders could claim such omniscience. Professor Sprout had just left, and she had told him everything she knew about Daniel. After leaving the underground classroom, Dumbledore had questioned the house ghosts. The fat friar remembered seeing Daniel after lunch, dazed, returning to the Hufflepuff common room, and then leaving sometime later without the friar noticing. The student reports and the ghost's memory matched. Daniel Bell had disappeared in the afternoon. From the moment he vanished until Filch found him, the attack could have occurred at any point. The underground classroom was seldom passed. Daniel might have been lying there from the moment he went missing. If Filch had not stumbled upon him, he could have remained undiscovered much longer. A knock sounded on the door. Snape entered. How is it, Severus? Dumbledore asked. Snape shook his head. Fooley seemed perfectly normal. Everything he did fit his role as a professor. If what you see is all there is, it only shows he's less clever than he wants us to think, Dumbledore said. What did he say? Of course he denied it, Snape replied. Who would confess to something like this? He claims he was only looking for something. I've been watching him since I learned of this, Snape continued after a moment's thought. His behavior is almost too normal to the point of being abnormal. He has a talent for acting, Dumbledore observed, and a taste for performance. Indeed, his behavior is almost prearranged, as if everything was going according to a script. That very perfection makes him more suspicious, Snape said. If we hadn't focused on him, his conduct would have seemed flawless. Because we have been watching him for some time, his actions now look clumsy under scrutiny, Dumbledore added. Snape agreed. After he left the underground classroom, he went straight back to his office and hasn't left since. With an assault on the grounds, Dumbledore said, everyone's on edge. Professors will tighten patrols. He won't find a good opportunity right now. He'll have to wait. Perhaps he's trying to fish in troubled waters, Snape offered. He stirs things up to divert attention, then searches openly alongside the patrols. It would make things easier for him. That would also reduce efficiency, Dumbledore noted. He'd be assigned to an area and couldn't go wherever he pleased. Everything I've said is conjecture until we have evidence, Snape conceded. Dumbledore finally picked one of the sweets at random. We can't haul him off to Azkaban on suspicion. If he really intended to fish in troubled waters, then he's succeeded, Snape said. At the moment, we have no way to act. They sat in silence for a while, each thinking their own thoughts. "Oh, by the way," Dumbledore said at last, "have you discovered what he's looking for?" "Not yet." Snape's expression tightened. "He asked me for help, but he hasn't told me everything. He's hiding a great deal." "He can't trust you?" Dumbledore asked. Snape met the question with a faint look of displeasure. "It isn't a matter of trust. He's afraid I'll take it. On one hand, he wants my help. On the other, he's guarding the thing from me." "What a contradiction," Dumbledore said softly. "He's not merely inconsistent," Snape replied. "There's an odd fanaticism about him. He speaks as if an object could change the world, yet he himself isn't clear about what it is. He's simply convinced it must be somewhere in Hogwarts." Dumbledore nodded. He had suspected as much for some time. If that were true, he could not allow a pure blood like Benedict Fewley to find it. "Things do not change the world. People do," he said thoughtfully. "No, except men like you, who shape the world to suit their own designs." Snape shot back, eyes briefly hollow with some remembered bitterness. Dumbledore only smiled. "A thing capable of making a wizard like him obsessed? Is that not worth seeing? Fewley seems to run about like a headless chicken. Your idea of broadening his horizons will probably come to nothing." "Severus," Dumbledore said earnestly, "people need hope and aspiration to live." "Those are the words cunning liars use to manipulate fools," Snape said coldly. "Hope is one of the greatest gifts of this world," Dumbledore answered. "Even in darkness, hope lights a path. It is because of love and hope that we continue to move forward." Snape turned away, unwilling to listen to such platitudes. Dumbledore shifted the conversation. "Have you found the first year who overheard your conversation that day?" "A first-year brat, arrogant and irritating," Snape answered, not pleased. Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. "Let me guess, would that arrogant and irritating brat happen to be Miss Esmeralda Twister?" Snape showed no surprise. Dumbledore had been watching Esmeralda with some interest too since the term began. Aside from a certain mischievousness, Dumbledore found her promising and had even considered whether she might fit into future plans. "Do me a favor, Severus," Dumbledore said. "Keep an eye on that girl." "She's in Gryffindor," Snape began. "I've asked Professor McGonagall as well," Dumbledore interrupted lightly. Snape's face went blank for a moment. His expression conveyed the question without words. "You've already asked McGonagall. Why ask me?" "It's different," Dumbledore said. "If Miss Twister accidentally becomes involved with Benedict Fewley's affairs, I'm entrusting her to you." After the attack, Hogwarts changed. Students stopped wandering alone. They moved in threes or fives, and even the boys went to the lavatory in pairs. During the day, any professor without lessons patrolled the more secluded corridors. At night, staff paired up and swept the castle room by room. For more than 10 days, they found nothing. The feared repeat attack never happened. Daniel's assault began to look like a terrible, isolated bit of bad luck. 3 days after the attack, Daniel left Hogwarts. In the infirmary, he had been on edge and terrified, lashing out at anyone who came near, Madame Pomfrey included. His condition didn't improve, and he couldn't keep studying, so his mother, Belle, had no choice but to take him home to recover. She made no scene at the school. She stayed composed and held her son close. With Dumbledore's help, she carried Daniel out of Hogwarts, supporting his weight on her slender shoulders, and the two of them left in the first snow of November. Those same searches made Ida's life difficult. Her night-roaming task had only been completed 5 times, half finished, and every patrol made going out at night like courting death. So she spent her days with Fred and George. When the twins plotted pranks, Ida found targets and kept lookout. Compared to the perpetrator of the attack, many Gryffindors had lately taken a grudge against the 3 of them. She even accompanied the twins to the second-floor girls' lavatory, and under their combined harassment, Myrtle could only flee her haunt for a while. Ada, triumphant at reclaiming the bathroom, laughed like a villain in a play and resumed her interrupted practice there, dragging the twins along to help and to give herself useful repetition. When Quidditch training began, Fred and George hauled Ida out of the warm castle to the pitch, insisting she needed fresh air instead of always sitting by the fire. Since the start of term, they'd been trying to get her interested in the game, but she had no confidence on a broom and preferred reading from the sidelines. She'd clap sometimes to give Charlie face, but mostly she ignored the play. As the weather turned colder, sitting and reading on the pitch became intolerable. Gloves made handling her books difficult. Reluctantly, she put her backpack down and actually watched the training. To her surprise, she found herself drawn in. Quietly, almost without noticing, Ida developed a strong interest in Quidditch, so much so that she quickly became known as Gryffindor's most enthusiastic cheerleader and something of a Quidditch darling. She still wouldn't swap her robes for simpler clothes. Not because of the cold, but because some last shred of pride wouldn't let her be treated like a little princess. She wanted to be a queen, not coddled. That day she stood beside Hagrid. Next to his enormous frame, she looked even smaller. Hagrid supported Gryffindor at every match, but rarely came to training, and his size was excellent at shielding her from the cold. Captain Charlie let the twins play a half-court with the team, and the two first years, riding old brooms, didn't perform like seasoned chasers. Naturally, Ida, the team's loudest sideline critic, had remarks. "George, can you play? Pass the quaffle," she shouted, cupping her hands. "Fred, did you skip lunch? Your shot's so weak, like a—" She stopped, corrected her tone, and called out differently. "You two, cooperate. Aren't you twins?" She wasn't trying to pick on anyone stronger, just the twins she felt comfortable teasing. Under Ida's relentless commentary, Fred and George gradually warmed up. Their confidence burst forth. They began to score against the regular defenders, narrowing the gap. Once the twins were doing well, Ida finally quieted, put her criticisms away, and watched. Hagrid looked down at the silent girl beside him, bewildered. When she wasn't talking, she was utterly charming. The moment she opened her mouth, however, she transformed into someone else. Women, Hagrid thought, were certainly curious creatures. In the end, the Weasley side still lost. They'd been behind after the first half and couldn't completely recover, though the twins' spirited play kept the match alive. They didn't look beaten. Instead, they hurried over to Ida afterward, brimming with pride. "How was it? We did pretty well, didn't we?" they asked. So-so." Ida, who tended to be sparing with praise, offered polite criticism now that the match was done. "There's room to improve." The twins expected it. Ida's theories were better than her flying. She could talk strategy all day, but on a broom, she was awkward. Still, with the help of the system, she'd become a Quidditch theory master in her own right, and had real insight even if her practical skill lagged behind. After saying goodbye to Hagrid, the three walked toward the castle. Darkness was falling, and the Great Hall's dinner call drifted across the grounds. Fred and George squeezed Ida between them, a petty retaliation for her earlier barbs. They ran through positions, both of them waxing lyrical about playing beater. "I'll take beater," said the one on her left, Fred. "Me too," echoed George. "Swing the bat, lob bludgers, mess up the other team's offense. Wonderful." "What about you?" they asked in unison, close to her ears. Ada rubbed them away. Being sandwiched like a pressed sandwich, she could only take it silently. "Next year we'll be on the official roster," George boasted. "Starters, even." "We'll bet on it. One sickle," Fred added. Ida shook her head and broke free of their squeeze, not even looking at them as she sped toward the castle. She was starving, still young, still needing proper meals, and the Great Hall's summons pulled her along faster than anything else. 27. Why is Snape like that? The Gryffindor table in the Great Hall was already crowded. Ida ladled a steaming bowl of vegetable soup onto her plate. The warmth loosened the chill that had tightened her limbs all afternoon. "How was practice?" Angelina asked. The weather had been brutal, and she and Alicia hadn't gone out to watch. "It's a pity you two didn't go today," Fred cut in before Ida could answer, though he was still halfway through a sausage and lost credibility with every bite. "We played a friendly against the first team, half-court offense and defense." George piled food on his plate. Angelina and Alicia looked disappointed. "They didn't win, did they?" Angelina asked Ada. "Unfortunately, it's true. They lost. If you'd been there, maybe we'd have won," Ida replied, unable to keep the teasing out of her voice. She put down her fork and softened her tone. "Don't be too down. Charlie said there'll be more friendlies." The two brightened slightly, and then attacked their beef with renewed vigor, each slice clipped with the sort of small, fierce gestures that spoke of wounded pride. Charlie had said as much. He'd stopped pinning the team's hopes on this year's squad and was already looking to next year. The twins, Angelina and Alicia, were all promising enough to be worth developing. After dinner, the group drifted back toward the warm noise of the common room. At Fred and George's request, balance work and rest, Ida skipped any extra practice. The twins wrestled with their homework as if the assignment book were personally affronting them. Ida, who'd long since finished hers, took out Brew Your Glory to prepare for next week's potions class. She had to be ready. "How did you offend Snape this time?" George asked, glancing up at the potion book in her hands. "You really haven't done anything recently? You've been behaving?" "I haven't spoken out. I do what he says," Ida replied without looking up, reading about the effects of a potion ingredient. "I've been very careful." "You're the only one he singles out this year," Fred said. "Your luck's so bad you should start entering the Prophet's lotteries." Ida almost smiled at the image, the idea of a sudden fortune lifting her far from the daily grind. "I wish Professor McGonagall would be like Snape," George sighed. "She wouldn't be herself if she was," Ida said. "McGonagall looks after her students too, but she does it quietly. Snape is different. If we could knock Slytherin off the top of the House Cup this year, imagine Snape's face!" The twins grinned, indulging in the fantasy. "Go wash up and sleep. Have whatever you like in your dreams," Fred said, giving her a conspiratorial wink. Ida yawned, waved to the twins, and retreated to the dormitories. Friday afternoons were a particular kind of torture for first-year Gryffindors. The weekend was within reach, and yet potions, and Snape loomed over it. Fortunately for the house, Gryffindor had Ida, the unofficial tank, taking the brunt of Snape's ire. Since November, for reasons she didn't understand, his attention on her had intensified. He asked questions that weren't in the syllabus, expecting the sort of quick, wide-ranging answers that set traps for anyone who couldn't keep up. Any hint of complaint or backtalk earned point deductions. The potions classroom was dim when the little lions arrived early. Ida slid into her seat between the twins and tried to make herself small. Snape's lectures were a risk. Better to be cautious than to lose points for bravado. She huddled down, keeping her head lower than the others. When Snape entered, he moved, seemingly, without effort from the back row to the podium. His face was sallow and his hair as greasy as ever. Ada, hidden behind Fred and George, wondered with private impatience how often he washed it. There was no point being invisible. He always found her. His gaze passed over the twins as if to pierce whatever shield they offered, and then settled on her. "Miss Trist," he called, with that clipped, superior tone. "If I needed to brew a shrinking potion, what ingredients would I require?" It was a question he'd asked last class. Ida had spent the evening in the library and found the recipe. "Chopped daisy roots, peeled shriveled figs, sliced caterpillars, a drop of rat spleen, and a little leech juice, Professor," she recited. Snape's satisfaction was internal. He never rewarded her. Asking her questions at the start of class was, he apparently believed, a way to keep her productive and out of trouble at night. He wasn't done. "And if I wished to brew a beautifying potion?" Ada didn't know and kept her voice level. "I don't know, Professor. It seems our know-it-all has limits after all," Snape said, sarcasm like a blade. "Perhaps the day you've lost that pretty face, you'll finally remember how to make that potion." Ida clenched her fists beneath the desk and forced herself to breathe slowly until the words meant less. "For a mind not much better than a troll's," Snape went on, "I shall ask one more simple question. What potions can the feathers of a fooper be used for?" She'd read about the fooper yesterday. "Memory potion and veritessarum, Professor," Ida replied automatically. "Miss Trist, you finally learned to put that brain to use. You are already smarter than a troll. Commendable." With the insult wrapped in backhanded praise, Snape closed the interrogation. "Turn to page 87. This is today's lesson." Books rustled as pages were turned. Ida let out a long breath. No points had been docked this lesson, and that felt like a small victory. The twins gave her a quick thumbs up as they turned their pages. Encouragement enough. Snape's endless petty prodding had an upside. She'd learned a lot of extra potion recipes by frantic reading after class. It was a bitter blessing. Still, Snape's slow, deliberate picking at her nerves left her helpless. She couldn't say when it would end, only hope that one day, soon, Snape would grant the mercy of a quick finish. Saturday morning at Hogwarts moved at a lazy pace. The students who had been busy all week were sleeping in, and even the castle seemed to be taking it easy. Ada tossed and turned for a while before forcing herself out of bed, changing quietly so as not to wake Angelina and Alicia, and slipping out of the common room. The great hall was quieter than usual, small groups clustered at the long tables. Ada greeted a few Gryffindors as she passed. Ever since Professor McGonagall had spoken with her, she'd been making more of an effort to talk to her classmates. After breakfast, she wandered the castle, still searching for a better, safe house. Escorting 2 boys to the girls' lavatory every other day was hardly a long-term plan. Eventually, she drifted toward the library. Madame Pince stood at her usual post with a feather duster, prowling the stacks. Only a few students were reading. Ada walked through the aisles and paused at the Defense Against the Dark Arts shelf. She felt someone staring and looked up into Madame Pince's cold, assessing gaze. "I won't go into the restricted section, madam," Ada said with a smile. Madame Pince said nothing. She glanced once more and then went on patrol, though she kept sneaking glances back. Ada pulled a book from the shelf and settled into a quiet corner. The library was hushed, everyone intimidated into good behavior by the feather duster's presence. Around 10, the Weasley twins arrived, flopping down on either side of her and immediately resuming the sleep they'd left hanging over them. By 11, her stomach reminded her it was time to eat. She shut her book and nudged both of them awake. What's wrong?" Fred rubbed his eyes. "Time to eat. And after that, we've got to go to the lavatory to practice spells," Ada said. Ada wandered over to Madame Pince to check out a few more books while the twins stumbled behind, still half asleep and bumping into tables. Later in the afternoon, the 3 of them left the castle to meet Hagrid at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, where his hut stood. There was a gigantic crossbow propped by the doorway and a pair of rubber overshoes so huge they could have stepped into a cauldron. The twins' eyes went to the trees and shone with longing. Earlier in term, they'd planned to explore the forest, but the castle's many distractions always got in the way. Fred knocked, low barks answered from inside, and Hagrid opened his door, filling the frame with his broad shoulders and welcoming grin. A great black hound strained at a chain around its neck, eager to leap out. Hagrid ushered them into the single-room hut. Kitchen, living room, and bedroom all in one. Everything was made for giants. Broad bed, oversized furniture. A copper kettle bubbled on the brazier. Hagrid poured boiling water into a large teapot and then into 3 mugs with his usual hospitable clumsiness. "Drink up, warm yourselves," he said, setting a plate of rock cakes on the table. George leaned over and hissed in Ada's ear, "If you like your teeth, don't try one." The rock cakes looked forlorn, rough, speckled with something like raisins. Ada picked one up out of curiosity. It felt like she was holding a brick. "Try it, Ada. I'm tellin' yer, my cookin' ain't half bad," Hagrid said, bright-eyed. "If ye like 'em, I'll pack some for your roommates. You're studyin' so hard, ye need to keep your strength up." Ada cursed herself silently. Curiosity had a price. She bit gently and discovered she might as well have tried to bite a rock. The cake resisted. Fred and George, gripping their mugs, tried not to laugh. Their eyes encouraged her to bite harder. They gave each other a look. If she persisted, there'd be a funeral for her front teeth. Hagrid's hound had been barking the whole time. At last, Hagrid unfastened the chain, and as the dog bounded forward, wagging and keen, Ada slipped the rock cake into her robe pocket as if she'd eaten it, to save herself from additional offers. "That hound's called Fang," Fred said. "He looks rough, but he's all bark." Fang lunged up at Ada, tail wagging. "Back! Fang! Back off!" Hagrid shouted, while Ada laughed and reached to stroke him. "Don't worry, Ada, he won't bite." "I like him," Ada said, kneeling beside the dog. She had always liked animals. Hagrid noticed the empty spot where the rock cake had been and asked eagerly, "So how was it? Taste all right?" Ada paused mid-pet. "It was fine. A bit hard," she said carefully. "I like 'em a bit crisper," Hagrid said cheerfully, not quite following the diplomacy. "Good. I'll pack some for your travels." Fred and George took the opening to unload on Snape. Hagrid listened with righteous indignation. Snape's always been like that. When he was a student, none of 'em liked him much. "Not much changed when he started teaching," Hagrid said. "Maybe next year, with a new lot of students, he'll forget ye a bit." Ada hoped so. Then the twins, spotting their chance, turned all charm on Hagrid. "Can you tell us about the Forbidden Forest?" Hagrid's face brightened. "There's all sorts in there. Centaurs, unicorns, thestrals, spiders. We love magical creatures," the twins chorused, and Hagrid warmed visibly. "Your brother Charlie's brilliant with the dragons," he said. "Nice lad, Charlie." "We were inspired by Charlie," Fred said, eyes shining. "Dragons are brilliant." George flapped his arms and tried to look majestic, though Ada thought he looked more like a hen pecking at the ground. Hagrid, delighted, launched into a long, enthusiastic description of the creatures of the forest. Ada felt a little outside the conversation, except for Fang, who she decided to take in hand as a training project. She stole a small pastry from her pocket, a house elf's generosity, she'd saved it, and used it to coax Fang into obeying. "Fang, sit!" she commanded, and with the promise of food, the big dog sat, drooling. "Good boy," Ada cooed, breaking off a tiny piece and feeding it to him. Fang devoured it, which she felt proved Hagrid's cooking to be trying. Meanwhile, the other conversation had turned prickly. The twins wanted to explore the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid's enormous hands waved firm refusals. "No, dangerous, that forest. I couldn't let ye wander in. Creatures in there could kill a person, easily. Not allowed." "How can there be danger if you're with us?" Fred tried to reason. "We'll listen to you, we swear." "You'll have to wait till you're older. Professor Dumbledore wouldn't be happy." Hagrid's tone was stubborn and protective. "Can't we at least have a look round the outskirts?" George pressed, trying to compromise. Hagrid shook his head. Fred and George pushed and parried with the good-natured relentlessness they were famous for, but Hagrid wouldn't budge. Finally, Ada cut in. "Hagrid's right. You shouldn't make him do anything he's not comfortable with." They fell back, grudgingly sensible. They stayed a while longer, chatting about the beasts Hagrid kept and the mischief of school life. As dusk fell, they set off back to the castle. "Once we get some gear together, we'll be ready to go in properly," Fred said, still bright with plans. "We'll talk to Hagrid first. He knows the forest better than anyone." "Don't your consciences hurt?" Ada asked, swinging the bag of rock cakes Hagrid had insisted she take. She'd never meant to trick him into approval. The twins had simply been too eager. "Nope," the twins chorused cheerfully, already half in mischief. "Besides, we think your teeth'll survive." Ada felt a dull throb in her own teeth as she looked at the rock cakes. Those things weren't pastries. Tie a rope to one, and you'd have a weapon. If you don't do it, you won't die. That evening, back in the dormitory, Ada had just lain down when a loud thump made her sit up. A small bag had landed on the bedside table. Ada looked over to see Angelina had thrown it there. "What's that?" Alicia, equally startled, peered at the bag. "You didn't bring rocks back to the dormitory, did you?" Angelina asked, eyes narrowed. "Why would I bring a bag of rocks when I had nothing else to do?" Ada muttered, a little annoyed. "Hagrid asked me to bring these. He wants us to share them." Angelina and Alicia both shook their heads, not because they'd heard of Rock Cake's reputation, but because no sane person would think something that went thump was food. "You said pastries?" "That's not food, it's a brick," one of them whispered. "Come on, try one. Don't let Hagrid's good intentions go to waste," Ada said, pulling a rock cake out of the bag and offering it around. Seeing the actual pastry, the two girls declined even more resolutely. "Ada, you don't have to try it. We appreciate the thought." Ada put the brick back down. The hardest thing she'd ever eaten before was a frozen pear that hadn't thawed properly, and even that paled beside Hagrid's rock cakes. November had been tense. The professors had turned the castle upside down looking for the culprit behind the attacks and had found nothing. No hair, no trace. Aside from a few student contraband items Filch had confiscated, there had been no results. The students finally relaxed. Hogwarts filled with laughter again, and tonight the Gryffindor common room was livelier than usual. A huge pile of cakes sat on the coffee table, pots of pumpkin juice were passed around, and even older students were popping fizzing whizbees in celebration. Charlie's Quidditch team had beaten Hufflepuff that afternoon, and everyone was in high spirits. Fred and George were demolishing cakes, but still restless. "We're going for a night stroll," Fred announced, grinning at the room. "Want to come? A night stroll?" Ada hesitated. "Aren't you afraid of getting caught?" "The professors aren't searching the castle as much anymore," George said between mouthfuls. We'll just be careful. We'll watch out for Old Sack and his cat, Fred added with a snicker. Since Hagrid had started calling Filch Old Sack, the twins had adopted the nickname too. You two really are asking for trouble, Ada said, taking another bite of cake inwardly. Doesn't that make it more exciting? Fred said. A bland life is meaningless, George added seriously. Ada, are you really going to waste your youth? Ada thought. My youth isn't wasted. I've been swimming in a sea of books. But she only said, and how exactly would you define not wasting youth? You'll see when you're older, George said. When your Harry asks you about Hogwarts and you can't tell him anything because you never looked, won't you be ashamed? Fred waved his hands, painting an enthusiastic future. Ada rolled her eyes. She'd seen enough theatrics in the orphanage. She wasn't going to be talked into anything. She turned to head back to the dormitory as the twins called after her. We'll be in the common room at 11:30. Lying awake, Ada felt an unusual restlessness. She hadn't wandered the castle at night for a long time. Fear of the attacks had kept her close to the dormitory, and she found herself oddly missing the reckless energy of a Gryffindor night out. If you want to do it, do it. Ada got up, changed into clothes suitable for roaming the castle, and slipped out of the dormitory. She found Fred and George whispering in the common room. Bet Ada definitely comes. Silver sickle? Fred teased. A silver sickle for me too. George echoed, not falling for the trick. Ada cleared her throat as she came down the stairs. I don't want to go for a stroll, she said. I'm only worried you'll get caught, so I came to keep an eye on you. All right, we know, Fred said with a smile, amused by her stubbornness. Let's find Hogwarts' hidden secrets under cover of night. George led the way out. The cool corridor air felt brisk and freeing. We found a secret passage the first week, George told Ada. The one behind Gregory Goyle takes you outside the school. We're professionals, Fred boasted, patting his chest. They moved away from the Gryffindor Tower, deeper into the castle. The twins wanted to explore another rumored passage. Ada hoped to find a safe place and maybe tick off another task on whatever list was quietly nudging at her. They encountered no professors. They stopped at a large mirror on the 5th floor. The twins poked and prodded around it. You sure there's really a secret passage here? Ada asked. Not entirely, but this mirror's suspicious, George said. It's our intuition. Girls aren't the only ones with instincts, Fred added. Ada thought the mirror looked perfectly ordinary. Then, as they stood there, a small system pinged in Ada's head. Ding! Host has found a secret passage at Hogwarts. Night Stroll task completion, +1. If the correct entry method is found, Night Stroll task completion will be rewarded again. When they'd left the tower earlier, Ada's Night Stroll task had already gone up to 6. Now it ticked to 7. Seeing the increase, she drew her wand. She didn't want to meddle carelessly. She moved it along the mirror's edges, trying to sense a seam of magic, but her wand search did as little good as the twins poking and prodding. Before they could figure anything out, a cat's meow sliced through the quiet. Meow. All three turned and saw Mrs. Norris, thin and watchful, materialize as if she'd been waiting. Mrs. Norris, Fang's blind date, some students joked, stared at them with those huge unblinking eyes and let out a warning meow, as if to say, "Hands up! Don't move! Run!" Ada cried, and they fled. Mrs. Norris trotted after them, mewing and calling for her owner. Footsteps, Filch's clattering, impatient steps, came behind the cat. "Split up!" Ada shouted when they reached a cross corridor on the 4th floor. She turned left. Fred and George both went downstairs. Ada glared at the twins as they ran together. "Can't you two split up? One turn right, one go down the stairs. Must you run side by side?" She was alone, and Mrs. Norris soon caught up. The cat blocked her path and stared, unblinking. Ada's hand went to the rock cake she'd put in her pocket as a joke weapon. "Mrs. Norris," she tried, voice syrupy, "this is an incredibly rare delicacy." She shook the rock cake and flung it toward the cat. The pastry thudded and rolled across the flagstones. Mrs. Norris didn't so much as glance at it. The rock cake, clearly not tempting to pets, lay uselessly in front of her. Ada could have used it as a brick, but it wasn't an appetite solver. She had to move. "Impedimenta!" Ada shouted, flicking her wand. The impediment jinx slowed Mrs. Norris's steps. She cast it again and again until the cat's pursuit lost steam, and she managed to shake Filch's pet. Panting, heart racing, Ada pressed her back against a statue and tried to calm her pulse. She thought ruefully that she needed to work on stamina, if she ever found the time. The twins weren't so fortunate. Filch had caught them. He stood in the corridor with a triumphant sneer, one hand on each of their robes. "Ha! Finally I've got you," he said, rubbing his hands together. "This time I'll make you suffer." The look on Filch's face was almost gleeful. Even his wrinkles seemed to gleam. Fred and George, used to Filch's theatrics, grinned back cheekily. "Filch, how are you going to punish us? Polishing the trophy room, cleaning your stinky mop? I'll hang you up and whip you with a leather strap," Filch hissed. "Even disembowelment wouldn't settle my hatred for you. The headmistress abolished punishments like that ages ago. You can't do anything." "Poor Filch," the twins replied, uncowed. "One day, you two will pay." Filch ground his teeth. He grabbed the backs of their collars and began steering them toward his office. Fred and George, their necks in the grip of fate for the moment, could only follow. Ada crouched behind a statue in the empty corridor, watching them go, and waited for whatever would happen next. 30. Cunning Hunter Filch marched the Weasley twins toward his office, his mouth a running torrent of threats about how he would punish them. The punishments he described sounded medieval, bloody, and imaginative, but none of them could actually be carried out on students. Dumbledore had long since abolished such practices. Ada followed at a discreet distance, determined to keep an eye on the situation. If the twins were given detention, she could help them. Filch shoved Fred and George into the cramped office and slammed the door with a satisfying bang. The room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp, and the air smelled faintly of roasted fish. Brightly polished chains and handcuffs hung on the walls, but the twins were unbothered. They knew the office as well as Filch and his cat did. Filing cabinets for student disciplinary records stood against one wall. On the desk, a drawer bore the warning label, "Confiscated goods, extremely dangerous." "See those chains?" Filch said, voice oily with glee. "I'd hang you two up by them, leave you dangling like fish. A few days and you'd behave." Fred grinned, utterly unafraid. "Shame you can't hang us now. If it were me, I'd oil them more often. You never know when they'll be needed, Filch." George chimed in with a cheeky flourish, but Filch only grew more fierce. "The Forbidden Forest would do. Believe me, you'll be scared stiff." The twins merely shrugged. The Forbidden Forest sounded almost like a reward to them. But when Filch said he would have to inform Professor McGonagall and began scribbling his report on a scrap of parchment, their expressions shifted. Professor McGonagall inspired a kind of reverence even the twins respected. Filch, engrossed, didn't notice the change. A sharp meow at the doorway made him glance up. Mrs. Norris patted in. Filch scooped her up and hustled back toward the door. "Speak," he demanded, leaning toward the twins. "Where's the other one? That dark-haired boy who hangs about with you. Where is he?" For a moment, the thrill of catching the twins made Filch forget that someone else might have been out that night. Then he remembered and stormed out, calling their names. He peered down the corridor, shouted a bluff or two, and when he saw nothing, he hurried back, worried that the twins would wreck the office if he left them unattended. No sooner had he left the room than George slipped a hand into the drawer labeled "Confiscated Goods" and began to rummage, while Fred stood in front of him, trying to look menacing and failing. Filch returned to find the office intact and the twins in exactly the same places they had been before. "You two, follow me. We're going to see Professor McGonagall," he said, and led them out. Ada had been hiding nearby, listening. When Mrs. Norris came past her again and meowed at the office door, Ada slipped away as soon as Filch carried the cat in. She used the detour to retrieve the evidence she'd left on the 4th floor earlier, then returned to the Gryffindor common room and settled into an armchair by the fireplace to wait for the twins. She hadn't been dozing long when she heard the portrait hole open. The twins entered, Fred and George trying to look as cheerful as ever. "Filch gave you much trouble?" Ada asked, relieved. The twins' smiles were thin, their faces subdued. Before she could press them, an icy voice cut through the room. "I knew you were hiding here." Professor McGonagall stood directly behind them, pajama-clad but wrapped in a cloak that did nothing to diminish her severity. She had brought the twins back herself, let them enter the common room first, then followed to catch whoever was still roaming the corridors. Ada's stomach dropped. She had walked right into the trap. "Professor McGonagall, please, I can explain," Ada began, but the head of Gryffindor fixed her with a look, and the words died in her throat. McGonagall peered down at the three of them. "You three are truly a credit to my house," she said, and the sarcasm cut like ice. Her voice remained controlled, but thunderous. "It is late, roaming the corridors at this hour. Do you know how dangerous that is? Miss Trist, I expected better of you. What promise did you make me in my office?" Miss Trist, Ada thought. The formal use of her name told her everything. McGonagall was not merely disappointed, she was angry. She exchanged a helpless glance with the twins. They hadn't betrayed her. Filch had brought them in, but McGonagall had outfoxed everyone. "You, Mr. Weasley," McGonagall continued, "you will answer for this behavior." She took 30 points from each of the twins. "Gryffindor loses 30 points each," she intoned, and Ada felt the blood drain from her face. The house cup had just slid further out of reach. "As for you, Miss Trist," McGonagall said, her voice softening only slightly, "though you were not caught by Filch, you are still responsible for your foolishness. From now on, you will do twice the homework for every subject, and it must be entirely original work, no repetition. Is that understood?" The three of them sat in the armchairs in stunned silence after McGonagall left. The twins looked rueful. Ada felt crushed by her own stupidity. If she had gone straight back to the dormitory, if she'd hidden on the stairwell instead, but hindsight was a poor comfort. No matter how sly a fox one might imagine herself to be, it was dangerous to mistake cleverness for experience. McGonagall was an old hunter in Hogwarts woods. Ada had been outfoxed. "I can't believe she did that," George muttered. "We trusted her." "We did say we trusted her," Fred replied. "Still, she pulled it off." Ada swallowed and tried to find a corner to blame. "It was my fault," she said finally. "If I'd behaved sensibly, none of this would have happened." Fred, wanting to lift the mood, nudged George. "Well, George, did you get anything from Filch's drawer? Anything to make this night worth it?" George reached into his pocket and produced a large, square sheet of parchment. It was worn, old, and blank. Fred blinked. What is that?" George shrugged, sheepish. "I don't know. It was in the drawer. Maybe we haven't discovered its use yet." Ada's heart raced. At first she thought George had just grabbed the wrong thing, but something in the parchment's weight and texture set her pulse jolting with quiet triumph. That was it. That was exactly what she'd been looking for. 31. Coming Christmas. The three of them, Ada, Fred, and George, stared blankly at the parchment. No one could figure out what clever trick the paper held. Fred and George turned it over and over, but it stayed stubbornly ordinary, a worn scrap of parchment with nothing hidden on it. "You take a look," George said, handing it to Ada. "Maybe you can make sense of it." Ada examined it carefully, then laid it on the table, drew her wand, and pointed. "Reveal your true form," she commanded. The parchment did nothing. "Apparecium," she tried, but again there was no reaction, as if it were only a plain piece of paper. Ada tapped it repeatedly with her wand and muttered all the revealing charms she could think of, but the old parchment remained inert. She spread her hands in defeat. George sighed and put the parchment away. "Looks like we'll be spending a lot more time trying to crack this." "I hope it's worth it," Fred said. "I hope whatever it is lives up to being extremely dangerous." They exchanged tired goodnights and trudged back to their dormitories. More work awaited them tomorrow. The reason Gryffindor lost points the next day became clear quickly enough. The common room's reaction to the Weasley twins' latest stunt was muted. Most of Gryffindor preferred to give the twins the cold shoulder and let them deal with the consequences. The twins were docked points, and that evening, Filch sentenced them to clean the boys' lavatory. Professor McGonagall forbade them from using magic, so their newly learned scouring charm was useless. Fred and George returned miserable and smelling of bleach. Ada, too, had been punished in a different way. A pile of double homework had kept her up and eaten into her practice time. The three of them continued to meet now and then to puzzle over the parchment, but they never found a clue. December at Hogwarts grew colder by the day, and Christmas was fast approaching. A week before the holidays, the twins finally finished their lavatory cleaning sentence, and Ada was let off her extra homework. Her hand speed had improved significantly during that time. She even joked about ghostwriting homework to earn a few extra galleons, every nut earned by her own hard work. Snow piled thicker around the castle. The surface of the Black Lake froze solid. Students called to friends and plunged into enthusiastic snowball fights on the grounds. Ada teamed up with Angelina, Alicia, and Lee Jordan to face the Weasley twins in an uneven 4 versus 2 skirmish. For the first part of the fight, the twins' teamwork gave them the advantage. Angelina and Alicia were pushed back by George, leaving Ada and Lee facing a lethal crossfire from the brothers. Fed up with taking hits, Ada decided to show them what a proper snow battle looked like. She rallied Angelina and Alicia into a sudden charge toward George, drawing his attention and stretching his defenses. Ada and Lee then braved Fred's hail of bullets and charged, toppling Fred and burying him in a drift of snow. They followed up by bringing down George, too. "You're not so smug now." Lee laughed as he looked down at the twins in the snow. He hadn't finished when the 3 girls tackled him and buried him in the same drift. Lee, who hadn't noticed the girls exchanging glances behind him, had only himself to blame. The twins had seen the plan unfold, but weren't about to warn Lee. After they'd dispatched him, Ada meant to gloat, only she didn't make the same mistake twice. She glanced back to see Angelina and Alicia pretending to brush snow from their cloaks. Feeling secure, Ada started to taunt the fallen boys. In an instant, the 2 girls sprang their ambush and buried her too. They high-fived triumphantly. The boys jeered at the 4th loser. Ada, flattened and speechless in the snow, muttered, "This world is beyond saving. Even a snowball fight needs scheming." Angelina and Alicia were still celebrating when Ada tried to sow discord. "Only the last one standing is the true winner," she called. The 2 girls glanced at each other, suddenly wary. Neither wanted the other to claim an advantage. The 4 buried players scrambled up, and the lopsided 4-on-2 match dissolved into a full 6-person free-for-all. Satisfied and soaking wet, the lot of them trudged back to the common room to change, and perhaps to take a cup of 999 cold medicine each. Their method of piling into small snowdrifts took hold. After that winter, wherever the students played on the training ground, there were little mounds of disturbed snow. Passers-by might have thought they'd walked into a cemetery. That evening in the Great Hall, Professor McGonagall drew up the list of students staying at school for the holidays. Everyone Ada knew planned to go home. She was the only one who chose to remain. Fred and George had invited her to spend Christmas at the Burrow, but Ada declined. The holidays, she felt, were best spent with family, and she didn't want to intrude. When McGonagall came by, Ada signed the list without hesitation. If only Snape wouldn't be staying, she thought. This Christmas would be perfect. In the days before the break, the twins kept hanging around Hagrid, fussing over him and peppering him with questions. Their interest wasn't entirely altruistic. They wanted any scraps of information about the Forbidden Forest, and some of their attentions were driven by guilt for having misled Hagrid earlier. The Great Hall was finally transformed for Christmas. Garlands of holly and mistletoe festooned the walls, and 12 tall trees stood clustered around the room, some hung with glittering icicles, others flickering with hundreds of candles. Professors McGonagall and Flitwick had worked together to make the hall as festive as possible, and the students' excitement grew until at last the Christmas holidays arrived. 32. Candy makes people happy. Christmas Eve was the night Mrs. Mary always told the children at the orphanage the story of Jesus' birth. This year Trist couldn't be there to hear it. Alone, she sat on the dormitory windowsill holding a cup of hot water, sipping slowly as moonlight washed the silver-white floor. With the holidays in full swing, Hogwarts felt empty. Most students had gone home, and only a few wandered the corridors. Although Trist had seemed lonely these past few days, she was secretly very content. She could sit in the coziest armchair by the fire whenever she wanted, and the common room no longer had the constant coming and going that used to disturb her. The dormitory was hers to command. She could practice spells without dashing off to the washroom and jostling for space with a senior who had died years ago. Trist had also been using the quieter nights to explore the castle. Filch's patrols had slackened for the holidays, and Benedict Fewley, the dashing Professor Trist had always been wary of, wasn't at school either. A lovesick senior had told her Professor Fooley would be reuniting with his family for Christmas instead of staying at a chilly Hogwarts. Trist took advantage of that to complete a long-delayed night-wandering mission and to earn a rewarded disillusionment charm. With the charm, even old Filch felt less intimidating. She'd also asked Mr. Weasley, the twins' father, to help send a letter to the orphanage. She wanted Mrs. Mary to know she was safe. As the night deepened, Trist finished her drink, set the cup on the sill, and went to bed. The next morning, the dormitory filled with sunlight. She slept in, woke refreshed, and stretched luxuriously. At the foot of her bed was a small pile of presents, the only ones she'd received, since she was the only one in the dormitory. The top package was thin, like a small booklet. Inside was a notebook from Professor McGonagall. On the flyleaf were the usual reminders to follow school rules and study hard, but the notebook itself contained McGonagall's personal notes on Transfiguration, insights very useful to Trist at her level. Her roommates, Angelina and Alicia, had given her books, and Trist had reciprocated with organized records of classic Quidditch matches and tactical plays, a thoughtful, money-saving gift. Fred and George had given her a large box of chocolates, the kind sold on the Hogwarts Express, and Trist had, in turn, given them a big package of Zonko's products. She thought the joke shop haul was pricey, but had bit the bullet. She'd swapped sweets with Lee Jordan. Just when she thought that was all, she found a large package tucked underneath. Inside was a box of homemade fudge and a handwritten card from Mrs. Weasley. Trist popped a piece of fudge in her mouth. It was sweet and rich with milk, an irresistible comfort that lifted her spirits. For all the joy the fudge brought, she still felt a pang of envy at the thought of a Weasley-style sweater, hand-knitted and emblazoned with the recipient's initial. The twins always complained that at Christmas the Weasley children got such sweaters, but Trist loved them and envied Fred and George, and even, in a small private way, their sister Ginny. People always wanted what they didn't have: family, friendship, comfort, or simply a few extra galleons. After tidying the wrapping paper, Trist slipped a piece of fudge into her robe pocket and left the common room, planning to stop at the Owlery and send a thank you to Mrs. Weasley. In high spirits from her gifts, she smiled and greeted everyone she passed, an unusual sight for her. The great hall smelled of roasted turkeys and was piled high with food. Wizard crackers were stacked along the tables. Every so often one would explode with a bang, releasing confetti, a small toy, or sometimes a lively white mouse. As Trist walked past, she saw a Gryffindor senior she often borrowed books from pull a cracker. With a cannon-like pop, blue smoke filled the air, and when it cleared, the senior was holding a men's top hat that oddly matched the floral lady's hat she'd been wearing. A few boys teased her, offering themselves as recipients of the hat. She smiled and, in a playful gesture, set the top hat on Trist's head, which made the latter look unexpectedly cute. After a brief chat, Trist went to the high table. She first offered Mrs. Weasley's fudge to Professors Flitwick and Sprout. They accepted happily, chuckling and sharing a few words with her. But Dumbledore had been watching since she started handing out sweets. When Trist reached his place, she greeted him. "Professor Dumbledore, Merry Christmas." He smiled and returned the greeting. Then she walked on, leaving him without a piece. Caught off guard, Dumbledore registered surprise. She had passed him by. He watched, puzzled, waiting to see if she'd remember him. Trist stopped by Hagrid's seat next to Professor McGonagall and gave him a piece, then hurried back toward McGonagall. She put both hands into her pockets, poured out all the fudge, and presented it like a treasure on McGonagall's table. "Professor McGonagall, Mrs. Weasley made this. It's delicious. Would you like some?" she asked with a bright smile, as if the student who'd been caught out late only the night before wasn't the same girl standing before her now. Judging by the amount of fudge on McGonagall's table, Trist had emptied her pockets. Even those who had missed out felt a twinge. No one likes to be overlooked. But Trist hadn't been trying to curry favor. She'd given sweets to the professors who had been kind to her. Sharing a few treats on a holiday was the least she could do. She'd given the largest share to McGonagall simply because McGonagall had been the kindest. Professor McGonagall beamed, her tall, pointed hat slightly askew but unbothered. Her smile carried a proud triumph, as if to say, "Look, this is my student who knows how to care." It was easy to forget that not long before, Trist had been the very student who'd nearly driven McGonagall to anger. Under McGonagall's pleased expression, Professors Flitwick and Sprout felt a warmth in their throats and found the fudge even sweeter. Snape, on the other side of the table, remained unmoved. He found such displays noisy and had no interest in joining in. Dumbledore's eyes stayed on Trist. He no longer thought about the fudge itself, but noticed something new in her behavior. To spare him any embarrassment, McGonagall slipped a piece of fudge to Dumbledore under the table. He looked down at it, and a small smile spread across his face. Whether at the candy, at being thought of, or at his own earlier impatience, only he knew. 33. Windfall. Ada left the Great Hall content, her belly full of turkey, roast, and Christmas pudding, clutching the prizes she'd won from the wizard crackers, a brand new gobstone set, and an exquisite wizard chess set. She had meant to study Professor McGonagall's notebook by the common room fireplace that afternoon, but a group of soaking wet students had already claimed it. They'd been having a long snowball fight on the training ground and looked as if they'd just been pulled from the Black Lake. They stood around the fire, drying their clothes and themselves. Deprived of the fireplace, Ada had no choice but to hole up in her dormitory. If her notebook was swapped for comics and she had a bottle of soda, she could be a complete homebody. She stayed in all afternoon, and only once the turkey had fully settled did she finally leave to forage for more food. A few sandwiches and Christmas cake cleared her foggy, food-addled brain, but being full made her lazy. She flopped on her bed like a couch potato, unwilling to move. This pleasant Christmas had let her relax completely. She even wished the day would never end. Of course, that wish was doomed. Ada had ambition, but for the moment she relished the idle comfort. Before the Weasley twins went home for the holidays, they'd given Ada a task: to keep checking the mirror on the 5th floor and see whether there really was a secret passage behind it. During the break, Ada had been going every day. The mirror was set into the wall, its bottom raised slightly off the floor, surrounded by elaborate carvings. The patterns were so intricate they always drew her attention, but she had never been able to find a clue in them. On this cold, silent night, Ada wrapped her cloak about her and slipped into the corridor. Standing before the mirror, she looked like a student who'd wandered by and paused to admire herself, the perfect cover if anyone chanced by. She stared too long and began to dislike the face in the glass. The reflection seemed rather mocking. Her whole good mood curdled. In a flash of petulance, she lifted her foot and kicked the mirror. The mirror didn't crack. It didn't even chip. Her stubborn toe did, however, make her wince. "Ouch," she muttered, crouching to rub her injured foot. She'd left the warm dormitory on Christmas night to stand in an empty corridor. She felt ridiculous. She vowed she'd make the twins pay when they returned. She was about to leave when she noticed the carvings had changed. The shift was tiny, a slight indentation here and there, something she would have missed if she hadn't been looking closely. She reached out and traced the grooves with her finger. They felt like the shapes of letters. Ada's memory had always been excellent, and it had gotten sharper since she'd taken to a little cheating in class, so memorizing what she found wasn't hard. Squatting on the cold floor, she began to rearrange the letters with her finger, trying combinations until the letters formed words and the words formed a sentence. It took time and many fiddled permutations, but eventually the message became clear. Ada glanced down the deserted corridor, satisfied there was no one watching, then stepped forward and, spreading her arms theatrically, spoke to the mirror. "Show me the world within the mirror." As soon as the words left her lips, the mirror softened and then dissolved. Where the glass had been, a dark opening yawned, just large enough for a person to squeeze through. Ada drew her wand and whispered, "Lumos." A small ball of light hovered at the wand tip and lit a short platform beyond the opening. Below it ran a tunnel that sloped downward. Ada sent the Lumos further along the passage and peered into the shadow. The incline looked gentle enough to walk, but the end could not be seen. Torches flanked the entrance, long unlit. She touched one with an incendio charm and caught the torch up in her left hand, wand in her right, and stepped into the tunnel. The only light was the torch and the faint glow from her wand. The only sound, her footsteps and the beat of her own heart. The tunnel twisted and turned. She had no idea how far she walked, but finally the passage opened into a large chamber. Using Lumos again, expending more magic than she liked, she sent a brighter flare into the air. Stone giants ringed the room, towering statues along the walls that both supported the ceiling and watched any who entered. Most were damaged, some toppled. Dust and loose stones littered the floor, a constant reminder that the place had not been touched for a very long time. It should have been a perfect secret space, yet the crumbling carvings hinted at risk. Ada crossed the chamber cautiously, torch in hand, and found another tunnel on the far side leading up. This one was shorter, and when she pushed a stone door open at the top, a rush of cool moonlight spilled in. She stepped out into a quiet lane. The village lay nearby, and the castle rose unmistakably close, Hogsmeade. Fortunately, there were no late pedestrians. She appeared as if from nowhere, and no one saw her. She had no intention of roaming Hogsmeade on a cold night. Having explored the tunnel, she'd completed the twins' task. Satisfied, she retraced her steps, back through the giant chamber, and down to the platform beneath the mirror. She waited a while to be sure no one was passing the corridor, then cast a disillusionment charm on herself. The spell sent a cold wash over her skin, like a cup of iced water poured down her back, and her outline blurred into the wall. Feeling invisible, she crept back to the common room and up to her dormitory. Ada did not fall asleep quickly. Her body was tired, but her mind replayed the evening in delighted loops. From the castle to the underground chamber of giants, then out to Hogsmeade. The whole trip had been surprisingly safe, and yet every moment was thrilling. Walking under Hogwarts at night and unearthing one of its secrets gave her a glow she hadn't known she was missing. She liked this life that tugged at the edges of trouble. Perhaps she wasn't meant for quiet, steady things. The Sorting Hat had put her in Gryffindor for a reason. The next morning, Ada resisted the urge to go down the secret passage, though a small voice in her head kept whispering, "Go see the underground room. Go see the underground room." Instead, she went to the library with the senior who had given her a hat earlier, Smith. Smith intended to work for the Ministry of Magic after graduation, so Ada asked her about job prospects for Hogwarts graduates. Smith's answer made Ada feel bleak. Low employment has always been a problem for Hogwarts alumni. Compared to the Muggle world, the magical community is tiny, and there are very few job openings. Wizards live longer and therefore work longer. Ada had never heard of retirement among most wizards, so positions only open up slowly. Haven't you seen Professor McGonagall still working away at her age? Ada thought. Hogwarts produces fresh blood for the magical world every year, but the world can't absorb them all. That's why so many graduates struggle to find work. Can a school that can't guarantee teaching, learning, or job placement really be called the best magic school in the world? It felt far worse than Bluefly, Ada thought. While she ate lunch in the Great Hall, she noticed Benedict Fooley at the staff table, meaning the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor had returned early. Maybe Fooley loved teaching, or maybe he was back looking for something. Either way, his presence made Ada's meal less pleasant. She always felt the man carried an aura of danger. That afternoon, Ada stayed in the dormitory and forced herself not to be swayed by the persistent little voice. She tried to read, but her attention wandered and she made almost no progress. By evening, she'd paced the dorm for hours, and finally she couldn't resist. She went back to the fifth-floor secret passage. In the dark underground room, she conjured a small, steady light, a little sun, and began to search. Whoever had built this hidden chamber had made an effort. It wasn't just a simple passage to Hogsmeade. The room's scale and construction implied purpose. If it were only a route to town, it wouldn't need such an elaborate build. Existence implies reason. Ada was convinced this huge room must hold secrets she hadn't yet found. That conviction is why she'd been restless all day. She studied the statues. Giants stood on stone plinths, feet planted, hands and shoulders supporting the dome. The figures made her think of Atlas, the titan punished to hold up the sky. Whether the sculptors meant to echo Atlas or it was a coincidence, Ada didn't know. The statues were uniform in design, but their expressions varied. She couldn't find two with the same face. Ada circled the chamber several times. Besides the two original entrances, there were no other passages and nothing else out of the ordinary. "Maybe I'm overthinking things," she muttered. Her voice rolled through the empty space, and the echoes confirmed the thought. Maybe it really was just a safe house built to resist threats. Maybe she was reading too much into it. Finding nothing didn't discourage her. On the contrary, she relaxed. If the room contained no earth-shattering secret, she could make it her own secret base. That felt like purpose enough. The only real danger seemed to be falling stones. As for the room collapsing, she figured that after surviving so long, it would hold for a while. In a few years she'd graduate, and whether the chamber fell in or blew up then would be none of her concern. She raised her wand to practice. The place was large, secluded, perfect. Wingardium Leviosa. She levitated a stone, then canceled the charm so it dropped. Crushing spell she cast at the falling rock. The descent was quick, and her first attempt missed, the curse striking the wall and making a small pit. She deliberately held back the spell's power. She couldn't yet place every shot with perfect accuracy. Again, Wingardium Leviosa. The stone rose. This time, as it fell, her crushing spell hit true and the rock shattered in midair. She didn't cheer, she only looked calm. It was a minor success. If Dumbledore were here, he could probably destroy the chamber with a single spell. Ada still had a long way to go. She knew many useful spells now, spells that would help in everyday life, but that was all. She called herself a life-oriented wizard, useful in ordinary life, but not exceptional. That described many people in the magical world, gifted with magic, but essentially ordinary. The truth was simple. Many Hogwarts students could pass their exams, but few became aurors or legendary wizards. Most lived quietly, middling. Ada, reborn, unwilling to be ordinary, wanted to be great, revered like Dumbledore or feared by all. Everything she did fed that ambition. For half a semester, she had been training toward that goal, taking small steps. Her spell accuracy had improved. She could handle rougher targets and easily beat up younger students, but facing an expert would be another matter. In combat, many spells can be blocked or negated. Excellent wizards can even reflect curses. Those defensive skills made her envious. But defenses only work if your attack lands in the opponent's effective area. If your spell is wildly off, the opponent doesn't even need to block. They can watch your mistakes and strike back when you're exposed. That gap in practical fighting experience was something Ada couldn't fix overnight. She moved on to smaller stones and increased the distance, fragmenting the chamber's debris until the floor was full of rubble. After a long session, she felt tired and decided to leave, kicking broken stones as she went. In that mood, she felt more like herself again. She emerged back into the castle to find curfew had already passed. All this worry about job prospects suddenly seemed less immediate. What she needed right now was a watch. The underground room lived without sunlight or clocks. It was easy to lose track of time. If she kept training there, she might even miss class. She cloaked herself with a disillusionment charm and made her slow way back to Gryffindor, her arm aching from the night's wand work. If only she knew where the kitchens were, she thought, clutching her stomach as she headed for the common room. 1989 had slipped away, and Ada welcomed 1990 amid wind and snow. This winter, she no longer had to brave the weather to get to work. She could spend her days in a warm room, enjoying the house elf's cooking like some comfortably off landlady. When she was busy, she read and studied. When she was free, she chatted and played cards. Ada hadn't had such a cozy life in a long time. As term time approached, students returned to Hogwarts full of holiday stories. Couples who had been apart all winter whispered to one another in corners, while the castle buzzed with a cheerful energy. The Weasley brothers came back together, Charlie leading, followed by Percy and the twins, strutting from the common room entrance to the firelit armchairs like they owned the place. Watching their swagger, Ada thought about knitting newsboy caps for them for Christmas, but decided in advance that if they got into trouble, it would not be her fault. Charlie and Percy stopped to greet her and then left, while Fred and George sat down opposite, beaming. Shame you couldn't come home with us, Fred said. Mum made loads of good food, George added, miming stuffing his face. Mum was thrilled to get your thank you letter. She insisted we bring you back next Christmas. During the holidays, the twins had told Mrs. Weasley about Ada's situation, hoping the redoubtable matriarch would send her an extra present and make Ada's Christmas less lonely. Mrs. Weasley had agreed. She'd liked the girl she'd met at the station. Ada had a knack for making good first impressions, even if she disliked socializing and usually wasted them. That fudge was the best gift I ever got, she said honestly. She loved all the presents she had, but Mrs. Weasley's fudge and Professor McGonagall's notes were particular favorites. Ada leaned in conspiratorially. Oh, and I found a secret passage behind a mirror, she whispered, wanting to see the twins' faces light up. Fred just said, well done. His reaction was flat, not at all what she'd hoped. A little wounded, Ada waited for George to reassure her. You really are the cleverest witch, George said, trying to smooth her hurt with flattery. You two barely look impressed. Weren't you always wondering about that passage? Ada pressed. Tonight, we'll go see it, Fred waved the comment off. No chance of getting caught this time. Totally safe, George added, looking mysteriously pleased. Ada rolled her eyes. You said the same last time. What happened? We got caught by Filch, they admitted together. But not tonight. We have this now. George produced a crumpled piece of parchment from his robe. Ada squinted. It looked like nothing special, until George tapped it with his wand and said, I solemnly swear that I am up to no good. Ink webbed across the page from the tip of the wand, lines connecting and spreading. Words formed in a neat green script at the top. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, purveyors of aids for magical mischief makers, are proud to present the Marauders map. Ada stared. The parchment showed every corridor and courtyard of Hogwarts and its grounds. Tiny black dots scuttled along the map, each labeled in minute writing. She found her own name among 3 cramped together. This thing showed everyone in the castle in real time. Filch's dot blinked in his office. He was there with a dot labeled Snape. There are loads of secret passages on it, George said. Most of them lead to Hogsmeade, 7 in all. Fred waggled a finger along routes on the map. No wonder they hadn't been impressed by Ada's mirror discovery. This map was the real prize. When did you get hold of this? Ada asked. At home over the holidays, Fred said. We had a little incident. Mum found out and gave us a proper talking to, George added, rubbing his rear as if recalling the lecture. That actually gave us a lot of inspiration. After a few attempts, it turned into what you see. They pointed out the places Ada had been during the break. During the holidays, you were only ever in your dormitory or in the library, Fred observed. Or the Great Hall, George added. You should get out more. Sunlight and fresh air are important. Ada laughed. They had watched her by following the map. At first, the twins supposed the map was broken because it kept showing her in the same small set of places. Later, George teased, they thought maybe it was her who'd become boring without them around. She hadn't left the castle much. She'd preferred to stay warm, but she planned to laze under the big tree by the lake when spring arrived. For now, she was content to admire the brilliance behind the map. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, she murmured. Amazing. We've got to be like them someday, Fred said with mock solemnity. When we got the password wrong, though, George added fondly, they left a few surprises for us. Fred's face took on a kind of reverent expression. I'd love to meet them. They sound like the perfect sort of mentors. They passed the map back and forth, each marveling at different things. Ada at the magic, the twins at the mischief. When she'd had her fill, George tapped the parchment again and said, Mischief managed. The lines vanished. The map became a blank scrap of paper again. No one's going to be interested in an old bit of paper, George said with a wink. Ada couldn't resist a jab. Weren't you the ones who nicked it? We didn't nick it, Fred protested. We got a connection to those seniors and discovered what the parchment does. They both looked sufficiently mysterious for Ada to know better than to press further. Tonight, then, they would go to see the mirror, and this time with a map like that, they might finally get away with it. 36. Ada's prophecy. That night, Ada met Fred and George in the common room. When nobody was watching, the 3 of them slipped out quietly. With the disillusionment charm and the Marauders map, Ada and the twins made their way to the 5th floor. Curfew had long passed, so they met no students along the way. Filch was patrolling the 3rd floor, and Mrs. Norris was elsewhere, so the corridor was clear. They entered a secret passage, one after another, Ada leading, the twins close behind. They did not stay long, just enough to look around and then leave. The Marauder's map showed no additional rooms branching from that passage, which put Ada's mind at ease. After leaving, they checked other passages marked on the map. The map might be old, and so it was important to verify the routes themselves. While investigating one of those passages, they nearly got caught by Filch. If they hadn't seen his movements on the map in time, Professor McGonagall's sleep would have been interrupted again. The three slipped out of the passage early and flattened themselves against the wall to hide. Soon, Filch walked by. He searched the ground and then went into the passage. Apparently, the marks the trio had left earlier were gone, destroyed when they had entered. The passage had been compromised. Filch knew it and had marked it so anyone entering would be discovered on his patrol. There were no secrets left in that tunnel. They said nothing until they reached the common room, where they finally relaxed and started to talk. Filch knows the castle shockingly well, Ada said. I wonder how many secret passages he's aware of. The twins exchanged a look. They had underestimated Old Bucket Filch. He had tricks they hadn't expected. Do you think he knows about the Humping Willow? George asked with a wicked grin, thinking of other tucked-away rotes. I hope so. I'd love to see him get thrashed by the willow, Fred said, and burst out laughing. Ada pictured it too. Filch swept sideways and then upending under the willow's thick branches. The image made her break into a laugh she didn't often allow herself to have. The three of them laughed until their eyes watered. It wasn't that they disliked Filch as a person, but some of his methods and mannerisms were simply ridiculous. After they settled, they agreed to meet for breakfast the next morning, then went to bed. Ada woke early and sat in the common room, reviewing spells while she waited for the twins. They didn't appear, and after a while she guessed they were still asleep. She decided she wouldn't wait and went straight to the boys' dormitory. Her sudden arrival caused chaos. The boys in the corridor were startled. They were young and unaccustomed to surprise visits. Ada walked through without hesitation and reached the twins' bed. One of their roommates was just leaving, so she didn't have to knock. Fred, George, and Lee Jordan were sound asleep. The room was messy but not reeking, thankfully no lingering smell of heather, so Ada lowered her hand from her nose. She walked to Fred's bed and pinched his nose. He inhaled sharply and woke in a flurry, bewildered. He rubbed his eyes and jerked the blanket up to his chin. How are you here? Who? Fred, what are you talking about? George sat up as well and clutched his blanket. How are you here? What's all the shouting for? Can't a person sleep? Muttered the only boy who had still been half asleep. Ada grabbed a pillow and threw it at him. Lee Jordan opened his eyes, equally confused. How are you here? The three of them demanded in near-perfect unison. Meet me in the common room in 10 minutes. Questions? Ada held a book like a cudgel and surveyed them icily. They nodded, not daring to argue. You're slow. Did I give you too much time? She taunted, weighing the book in one hand. Could you go out now? Fred asked, looking faintly abashed. Don't worry. I have no interest in seeing your small bodies. I might get a sty, Ada said coolly, and left, shutting the door behind her. 5 minutes later, she was back in the common room. The twins arrived fully dressed, followed by a bleary but obedient Lee. At breakfast in the great hall, Fred asked again, How did you get into the boys' dormitory? Angelina and Alicia looked on curiously. Ada nodded once, confirming she had indeed gone upstairs. Their expressions shifted through surprise, reproach, and a dash of, Why didn't you bring us? An old familiar mix. To call you lot down for breakfast, Ada said casually, spooning porridge into her mouth. The house elves' cooking was better than she expected. We know that. How did you get in? George persisted, craning his neck. I just walked in, Ada said. Seeing the three boys' incredulous faces, she explained, At Hogwarts, girls can enter the boys' dormitories. Then, boys can't go into girls' dormitories? A boy nearby blurted, hopeful. Ada tore off a piece of bread. Nope, she said, adding with a small, teasing smile. The boys and Lee all grumbled in outrage. That's not fair, they shouted. Shocking. Ada said dryly. How did you find out? Alicia asked, tugging at Ada's sleeve. During the holidays, I went to the library a lot with a girl named Smith, Ada replied. She talks a lot. Anything juicy? The twins perked up. They were suddenly more interested. Snape doesn't wash his hair, Ada offered, casting a quick glance at Snape at the staff table before lowering her head to avoid drawing attention. But that's everyone's business. Does that really count? George said. Isn't that common knowledge? Apart from that, nothing much. Smith plans to work at the ministry one day. She's serious about a career, Ada explained. Fred said casually, My dad works at the ministry. He works all day and still says his pay isn't great, George added with a shrug. Maybe one day a Weasley will become minister, Ada mused. Like Percy. Don't be ridiculous. Percy's a careerist. He'll never make it, George snapped. And Fred exclaimed, If Percy ever becomes minister, I'll eat your favorite armchair. Lee Jordan leaned in with some news he'd overheard. Minister Millicent Bagnold is stepping down. There's an election at the ministry. A few boys started speculating about potential candidates. The twins and most of the others showed little interest. Their minds were already on more practical matters, jokes to invent, and the possibility of opening a joke shop of their own. The ministry could wait. A business of their own sounded far more appealing. 37. After school starts. A group of boys clustered near the Gryffindor table, arguing with more heat than sense about who should be the next Minister of Magic. None of the names on the list satisfied them. Charlie Weasley strolled over and sat down beside the Weasley twins. What are you lot on about? He asked. Careers, Fred said. Who's going to be the next minister? When did you start caring about that? Charlie said. Aren't you two opening a joke shop soon? No, our dream is still to open a joke shop. Ada had finished eating and was resting for a moment before lessons. She listened as the twins nodded. Who cared who the minister was? Anyone would do. Certainly not Arthur Weasley, they all agreed, and the twins treated Ada's prophecy as a joke. A Weasley becoming minister seemed as likely as you-know-who coming back. Charlie, what do you think? Ada asked. Who did you hear mentioned? Charlie said. Cornelius Fudge, George said, and Barty Crouch. Charlie frowned. Of the two, Fudge's background is the weakest. He's done reasonably well in the Department of Accidents and Catastrophes, but he's not the strongest candidate, though he still has a shot. One of the lads said he seems a bit feeble, like he's easy to bully, someone snorted. If he were minister, we'd have a bit of a wimp in charge, Fred laughed. But there's been peace for years. As long as the minister doesn't make a mess of things, it might not matter. As for Barty Crouch, he's unlikely, Rupert said. Charlie nodded. Why? Ada asked. She read the Daily Prophet, and the name Barty Crouch had caught her attention. Strong was the first impression she had of him. Because people remember what happened, Charlie said. He used to be head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement and was one of the strongest prospects for minister. He was almost there once. Wait, wasn't he transferred to the Department of International Magical Cooperation? Ada asked. That's his current post, Charlie said, but he made his name as a hardliner in magical law enforcement. He earned enormous prestige for standing up to you-know-who. So why isn't his approval high? He didn't seem far from the top at all. Someone sounded puzzled. He had momentum, then something happened, Charlie said slowly. He lost people's trust. There was an incident that sank him, and after that he was moved out of magical law enforcement. You wouldn't know, Rupert added. None of us were very old when it happened. Lee Jordan's interest sharpened. The gossip spark in his eyes burned bright. What happened? It couldn't be. It's not what you think, Charlie interrupted, shaking his head. It's not something for you lot yet. It's heavy stuff. I was actually quite upset when I first heard. My mum was furious when she read it in The Prophet, Rupert said. She's very gentle, but she kept cursing old Barty Crouch for days. Anyway, the ministry's a bit beyond us, Charlie said. Stop thinking about it and eat. You'll be late for morning classes if you dawdle. He and Rupert left the table. What about Dumbledore? Someone suggested, and at the name a couple of girls who'd been uninterested drifted closer. He could be minister any time, Fred said, looking at them as if the idea was obvious. George agreed. If he wanted to, he could be minister, one of the girls said. But would he still remain headmaster? Ada wondered the same. If Dumbledore had wanted the job, with his reputation, he would already have had it. She suspected he didn't want the political post, and the thought comforted her. The conversation soon petered out. Ada had no desire to continue. "Time to go, gentlemen," she said, standing. "I don't want to rush to class on a full stomach." They'd lingered long enough that, had they been any slower, Gryffindor would have suffered a tide of late marks, and Professor McGonagall's reaction would have been deliciously ferocious. Instead, the bell rang, just as Ada sat down in Charms. It was the first proper lesson after the holidays, and half the class had not yet woken up. Professor Flitwick's lecture on theory was punctuated by the occasional nodding head. During practice, sleepy concentration turned to disasters, and the little professor, every inch the energetic teacher, spent the period dashing from table to table, correcting wand wavers and coaxing spells into working. Ada, predictably steady, performed flawlessly, a small comfort to the exhausted professor. He rewarded the house 5 points with obvious relief. Flitwick admired McGonagall's class control, but did not see the way the Transfiguration professor gritted her teeth when she thought no one was watching. The morning fog of sleepiness had settled over the entire school. Even the other houses were sluggish. The first week back had cost them all points and left the 4 heads of house with headaches no amount of pomfreyine could cure. Luckily, as the second week progressed, everyone began to adjust, and Hogwarts slid back toward normal. At night, Ada and the twins took time to check the castle's secret passages. The Marauder's map proved infallible. Every corridor and passage was exactly where it said, and the 3 of them slipped through the castle unseen. Ada had also started monitoring Professors Weasley and Snape on the map, partly to satisfy her curiosity and partly for her own safety. Snape's movements were ordinary, frequent trips to the headmaster's office, long, low conversations with Dumbledore, habitual pacing. Benedict Fooley, the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, had seemed straightforward at first, quiet in his office, predictable in his dormitory. Then Ada noticed him on the map, wandering the castle in the middle of the night. She had discovered it by accident. She woke to go to the bathroom, and returning to bed, she idly opened the map. There he was, moving through empty corridors. In the days that followed, Fooley was repeatedly active in the late hours, choosing times when the castle was at its quietest. If not for the map's real-time tracking, she never would have known. It was a wet, cold weekend. Even the Weasley twins didn't feel like leaving the castle. Ada curled into an armchair by the fire, reluctant to move, reading without really seeing the pages. Fred snapped his fingers near her ear until she blinked back into the room. "The homework's in your bag," Ada said, coming to herself. "Leave me be." "Where did your thoughts wander?" George asked with a grin. "To Tahiti," Ada said. "Warm year-round, spring all the time." "Where's that?" the twins asked together. "It's a muggle place they call almost heaven. The locals call themselves Children of God. I've always wanted to go." "They might not be too welcoming to you," Fred said, smirking. "After all, you are Merlin's child." Ada shot them a fierce look. "For the next week, do not borrow anything with words on it from me," she said, and turned back to her book. The image of Tahiti dissolved the moment she thought of the witch hunts of the Middle Ages, a reminder that even paradise can have a dark past. 38. Valentine's Day Battle Plan. After classes resumed, Benedict Fooley went out every night, but he still hadn't found what he was looking for. As Snape had warned, he was like a headless chicken, just scurrying around. If he could have helped it, he wouldn't have been like that. Almost everyone in the wizarding world knew one thing. The post of Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts at Hogwarts was cursed. No one lasted a full year. Each occupant met with misfortune, and some even lost their lives. To remain at Hogwarts, Fooley had no choice but to take that unpopular post. He told himself that once he found what he was after, he could leave, and it wouldn't take a year. But fate had other plans. He wasted a lot of time searching and still came up empty. Growing more anxious, he turned the castle inside out every night. Lack of rest and constant anxiety started to affect his teaching. Since classes resumed in January, he began making basic mistakes, things that would never have happened in the first term. His slip in performance disappointed many admirers. Loyalties shifted, and public opinion of him plummeted. Losing his composure, Fooley didn't know someone had been tracking him on the Marauders map. Ada had practically appropriated the map. She logged every place Fooley visited and the routes he took. To keep tabs on him, she adjusted her schedule. After Angelina and Alicia fell asleep, she would sneak out to watch the map. Then, during the day, she checked the places he had been. She didn't follow his exact path. She mixed it up, reassembled routes, and planned her own searches. A place Fooley had visited one night, she might not visit for 3 or 4 days. Since Fooley had been searching for so long, she didn't expect to find anything in only a few days either. So 2 people, each with different identities and different aims, began their all-night cultivation of the castle. One searched at night, the other by day. They carpet-searched Hogwarts until mid-February. Eventually, Fooley finally came to his senses and stopped his frantic nightly hunting. Ada, having lost her target, no longer had to stay up every night. Though she wasn't sure of Fooley's next move, at least she could sleep. February at Hogwarts was still cold, but with Valentine's Day, the castle's damp gloom thawed under a tide of youthful enthusiasm. Students, full of energy, began to flirt and declare their feelings, and the Great Hall once again became an owl bombardment zone. February 14th, 1990, Wednesday, Valentine's Day. That morning, Ada woke to find Angelina holding a letter. Ida yawned. "Looks like someone confessed to you, Angelina." "You mean this?" Angelina held the letter up. "Sort of." "Who wrote it? Is he handsome?" Alicia demanded, already gossiping. Angelina tossed the letter to her. Alicia skimmed it and exclaimed, "Lee Jordan was quick." "How are you going to reply?" Ada asked. The 6 of them had always been close, and she hadn't expected Lee Jordan to make a move on Angelina in their first year. "I don't know," Angelina admitted, uneasy. "What do you think? Give me some ideas." "If you don't even know what you want to do, how are we supposed to help?" Alicia said. Angelina put the letter away. She needed to think seriously about how to handle Lee Jordan. She didn't want things to get awkward. Alicia then remembered another thing. "Oh, Ida, someone wanted to write you a love letter too," she said. "They even asked me what sort of things you like." Ida, buttoning her robes, blinked. "Have I been that kind to people? Am I too meek with my wand? Or are others just too bold?" She wondered inwardly. She truly hadn't realized anyone would be bold enough to try courting her. Angelina looked puzzled. "Did I hear wrong? Kind to people, Ida?" Alicia, turning mischievous, added, "That sentence has stunned me for a year." "If you smiled more and were a bit gentler, you'd have love letters scattered all over your bed instead of none," Angelina teased, peering toward Ida's empty bed. Ida shot them a mock-threatening look, but Angelina and Alicia ignored her. Living together so long, they understood Ida, quick-tempered but easy to get along with, direct rather than scheming. Still, crossing Ida's limits had consequences. She didn't hesitate to let someone find out what the school infirmary was like. After dressing, Ida said, "Should I make whoever it was remember what fear feels like today?" "I'd keep it subtle," Alicia advised. "If you get caught, you'll lose house points again. We may not win the house cup, but we can't come last, can we?" Angelina finished dressing and added, "Think of Professor McGonagall." Thanks to the twins and Ada's past antics, Gryffindor had taken quite a hit in points lately, and McGonagall had been fretting. Ida thought weakly that they'd better not torment her any further. The idea of scaring the suitor off should be dropped. Once Alicia was ready, the 3 left the common room together. The castle corridors were suffused with a rosy glow. Spring hadn't truly arrived at Hogwarts, but for the students it certainly had. Every corner smelled faintly of romance. Some couples proudly displayed their affection, making the rest of the school groan with dog food. Where there was joy, there was also disappointment. Many confessions failed that day, and many waited anxiously for replies. While they ate breakfast in the Great Hall, Fred leaned over the table and grinned. "I hear you didn't get a single love letter? Disappointed?" Ida shook her head. "No, if anything, I'm relieved. Didn't you 2 get nothing either? Angelina, Alicia, and I could each write you a letter. Flowery language, brilliant prose, and it's free." "As I heard it," George said, "someone actually wanted to write to you, but we intercepted them. So cheer up, you still have charm." "Your concern warms my heart," Ida said. "I'll count on you to handle these matters for me in future." "Heart of steel," Fred teased. "Unfeeling," George tutted. Men only slow down my casting speed, Ida said. Have the two of you gone mad today? Actually, we can help you get a confession and reply for you, Fred began, showing his true colors. George finished the pitch. Guaranteed flowery language, brilliant writing, and it's free. The twins had a scheme. They figured anyone brave enough to send Ida a confession would probably be turned away by her bluntness. What a waste. So they wanted to recycle the suitors, reply in Ida's voice, arrange a meeting, and then set up a prank. But this time they needed Ida's consent. I never thought you two were capable of such maliciousness, Ida said, though she already suspected their plan. Replying for her, arranging a meeting, then springing the prank. If they went through with it, those poor boys might suffer real humiliation. The twins protested with feigned innocence. How could that be? They said. We're only teaching these innocent lads the harsh realities of life. Ida smiled in a way that suggested she wasn't entirely amused. I appreciate your concern on their behalf, she said dryly, amused by the twins' expressions. If they followed through, the boys would likely leave with more than a bruised ego. 39. Snape's sudden concern. Ada refused the twins' plan. It would only invite too much hatred. She didn't care what others thought of her, but the twins were different. They had parents and siblings. The Valentine's atmosphere lingered at Hogwarts through Thursday, but by Friday, it did nothing to save the Gryffindor first years. In potions, those romantic vibes made no impression on Professor Snape. Ada did well in that class and gave him no excuse to take points. She had developed a knack for handling Snape, and his deductions against her had been growing rarer. Snape prowled the classroom, finding faults with the little lions, and even the little snakes didn't escape his scrutiny. The lesson was a torment for everyone. It seemed only Ida escaped unscathed. She stood at her station, following Snape's method of brewing to the letter. His steps differed from the textbook, and at first she followed them only to avoid giving him an opening. Later, she realized his way actually taught more. Her proficiency improved, and the potion smelled better. What had started as caution turned into willing compliance. The liquid in her cauldron took on a silvery sheen. The potion was nearly finished. Only one step remained, and she waited patiently for the right moment to complete it. Snape, gliding through the room like a shadow, had of course seen Ida's cauldron. He had been finding fault with the students, but that didn't stop him from watching her closely. His outburst today wasn't because she had answered a difficult question. It was for another reason. Snape had noticed that Ida didn't just wander the castle at night. She wandered in the daytime, too. Others might not have realized what she was doing, but Snape certainly did. She disrupted her routines and replanned her routes in a way intended to deceive, but Snape was not deceived. He had also been keeping an eye on Fooly, so it was obvious to him that Ida had been copying Fooly's behavior. Her little tricks were transparent. In front of Snape, she was as innocent as a rabbit. Complacent fool, he might have muttered later in Dumbledore's office. Then another complaint to add to his workload, all on the headmaster's private request, unaccompanied by any compensation. Snape walked slowly to Ida's cauldron. Miss Trist, don't you think such careless handling will ruin a perfectly good potion? This is exactly according to your method, Professor, Ida answered without catching the sharper edge in his tone. She was a little overconfident today. It's almost finished. Presumptuousness? Is that a Gryffindor tradition? His voice carried a hint of disgust. Ida braced herself. She had no good answer except to endure his remarks, though more than once she'd wanted to fling the cauldron at him. Snape remained unmoved. When will you realize your shortcomings and the gap between you and others? What should I do then? She asked, adopting a pretense of humility and listening for his instruction. When it came to potion making, she knew few in the room could match her, aside from Snape himself. Snape's expression darkened. Your laziness surprises me, Miss Trist. He drew his wand and in a single motion emptied her cauldron. Ida stared, stunned. You're being awfully obvious. Don't you care about your reputation at all? He snapped. Professor? Remake it. Reflect on what you're doing as you prepare it, he said, the annoyance in his voice unmistakable. Finish it before class ends. Ida felt a flush of defeat looking at the empty vessel. There was still some time, but her chances of completing another full brew in time were slim, maybe 1 or 2 in 10. But Professor, she began, finish it before class ends and submit it in a glass file, Snape cut her off, regarding her coldly. If you can't, you'll have detention, Miss Trist. There was no point arguing. His face read plainly, one more word, and there's a deduction. She went back to fetch ingredients, focusing every ounce of energy into the brew, praying not to make any mistakes so she could finish in time and avoid lingering alone with Snape. But Merlin, the old man upstairs, was not on her side today. When the bell sounded, she still had 1 step to go. Bring me something to eat back to the common room, she whispered to Fred and George. Your potion's almost done. It shouldn't make you late for dinner, right? Fred waved off her worry. There was a long time till Hogwarts dinner, he said, and she had plenty of time. Ida, though, had a bad feeling. She wasn't worried Snape would harm her, only that she was probably going to go hungry. One by one, students filed out. Only Ida and Snape remained. She stared at the cauldron, silent, while Snape sat watching her like a judge. Finally, the potion shimmered perfect and silver. She bottled it in a glass vial and walked to him. Professor, I'm done, she said. Snape took the bottle without a word. May I go back now? She asked, hoping for leniency. Who said you could leave? Snape replied slowly. He hadn't promised anything. True, he had warned of detention if she failed to finish, but he hadn't said when she could go. Snape moved to the storage cabinet and dragged out a pile of unprocessed ingredients. Process these, he said as he set them on the bench. Can I leave when I finish processing them? Ida asked, wanting a straight answer, not another of his word games. Snape glanced at her. Depends on my mood. She had known it. Her premonition had been right. Still, she put on dragonhide gloves and began the tedious work. Think of it as practice, she told herself silently. Opportunities like this are rare, and Snape can't afford to waste potion materials. But forced practice felt very different from practicing by choice. As she worked, Snape was not idle. He went to her empty cauldron and started brewing his own potion. The sounds drew Ida's attention. As payment for using her cauldron, she decided to observe. She did not even know what he was making, but she tried to pick up what she could. Snape noticed her peeking, but seemed indifferent. He clearly didn't expect much from her. If she did manage to learn anything, perhaps he'd look at her differently. Time trickled by. Each time Ida was nearly finished processing the pile of ingredients, Snape would add more, treating her like unremunerated labor. She kept a careful mental record of his technique anyway. In the dim underground classroom, she lost count of how many things she'd prepped. It felt like enough for a first and second year's worth. Her stomach kept reminding her she hadn't eaten. Snape finished his potion. Nothing complicated, just something for Snape, bottled it, and stood watching her as she continued. Finally, he broke the silence. Is your coursework too light, Miss Trist, that you have time to stroll around? Ada paused, then kept working. I wasn't wandering, Professor, she said. I really like the castle. I can't help looking around. She didn't expect those words to fool him, but she couldn't tell him the whole truth. She trusted that he wouldn't harm her as a student, but that wasn't the same as trusting him completely. Better to speak only a part of the truth. Stubborn, Snape noted, filing it away with his other judgments. You may go. The rest of the ingredients will wait for next time. I'll tell you when. Her resistance had failed. Ada had become Snape's unpaid helper. Exhausted, she returned to the common room. Dinner had long passed, and she could only hope the twins had brought food. Half dead, she sank into an armchair and ate the sandwiches they'd given her. Life felt worth living again. Ida, something else happened at school, Fred called, leaning in excitedly. What's more important than eating? She replied around a mouthful of cake. There's a thief at the school, George added mysteriously. 40. Gryffindor in action. Did they catch him? Ada asked between bites. I don't know how Hogwarts treats thieves. Fred snatched a cake from her hand. Can you sober up a bit? If I'd been caught, why would I be telling you? George replied. Someone stole something but wasn't caught. What exactly was lost? Ada pressed. The problem is, nothing was lost, the twins said in unison. Someone had rifled through things at Hogwarts but taken nothing. The intruder had been seen but not seized. It made no sense. What was the point of it? Ada, finally free from Snape's constant shadow for a few hours, let herself think. Her information was behind. She asked, "Who found it this time? Filch again?" A Ravenclaw student noticed his things in the dormitory had been moved, but none of his classmates or roommates had touched them, George said. After that, other Ravenclaws found the same thing, Fred added. Only Ravenclaw? Ada asked. Only Ravenclaw students complained at dinner, and they told Professor Flitwick, George confirmed. Don't you think this thief is odd? He's gone through so many people's things and taken nothing, Fred laughed. Ada had a thought. Maybe he didn't find what he was looking for. What could you find in Ravenclaw? Books, books, and more books, Fred joked. Ravenclaw admitted young witches and wizards eager for knowledge. They'd the richest private library and, on average, the most books of any house. Their common room was guarded not by a password, but by a bronze knocker that asked a question. Anyone clever enough could answer and get in. If this theft wasn't an inside job, it at least meant the thief was clever. I hope Mr. Thief comes visit Gryffindor, George said, pouring Ada a glass of pumpkin juice, wary she might choke on her cake. Ada took a sip. Hoping to be visited? There probably isn't a single person in Hogwarts who wouldn't. You're wrong. I think a lot of people have the same idea. Although he doesn't steal anything, we could make him take the blame. The twins always saw things differently. Their schemes were endlessly inventive. For example, they chorused, if Gryffindor gets a visit, we'll tell Professor McGonagall our homework's missing. Ada rubbed her temples. It's truly you two. McGonagall really found herself a treasure. Though she won't believe it, Fred conceded. But life's about hope. What if? After finishing what the twins had brought back, Ada took out her own homework. She needed to finish quickly. Fred and George were eagerly awaiting. Saturday came, and the school went about its business. The thief's reputation was no deterrent. This was no murderer, and he hadn't even taken anything. Some Gryffindors decided they'd catch him themselves. No special award, perhaps, but house points, if Dumbledore was generous, might help the house cup. Groups of students in crimson and gold scarves fanned out across the castle, setting up a dragnet, watching corridors and common rooms day and night. Gryffindors walked in pairs everywhere. Students from other houses saw them in twos and threes constantly. Charlie Weasley and the other prefects didn't interfere. They even helped organize a little. In everyone's eyes, the thief was already in Gryffindor's pocket. Ada and her friends didn't join. The older students had left the first and second years out of it. They figured the little ones wouldn't be useful as lookouts. By dinner, Gryffindor's grand encirclement had turned up nothing. If the thief wasn't a fool, he wouldn't work on a weekend with a squad of eager Gryffindors lying in wait. The long table felt subdued, a rare hush over the house. The upperclassmen debated plans and next moves. One small failure wouldn't dampen Gryffindor resolve. Ada glanced at the twins. Their eyes were bloodshot. What's wrong with you two? Crying over spilt pumpkin juice? We've been staring at the Marauders map all day, George said, sinking into a bench beside her. I think my eyes are going to go blind. If we'd spotted something, going blind would have been worth it, Fred said. Now it feels like a waste. Ada didn't understand why they'd suddenly thrown themselves into the hunt so hard. Didn't you want the thief to steal your homework yesterday? Why are you trying so hard now? For house points, of course. It's rare to get such an interesting way to earn them, Fred said. The twins loved pranks and anything amusing. No lessons, no need to ingratiate themselves in class. Just catch a petty thief. Naturally, it appealed. There are lots of people in common rooms on the weekend. Who would pick such a time to go rifling through things? Ada said. Give it up. And with so many names on the map, can you even keep track of them all? They'd been staring at the map so long they hadn't blinked. Trying to watch every common room, every jostling cluster of names was exhausting. Do you think Dumbledore will compensate our poor eyes? They asked together. You should go to Madame Pomfrey instead, Ada said. Inwardly she thought, don't worry, you won't go blind. I used to sit in front of a screen all day and I didn't go blind either. As she ate, a Slytherin senior appeared behind her. Tryst, he handed Ada a folded note. This is from our dean. Ada opened it. 7:30, dungeons. The summons she'd feared all day had finally come. She'd thought perhaps Snape had forgotten, but apparently he had not. The twins tried for sympathetic looks, but their bloodshot eyes betrayed only jealousy. Ada had the privilege of Snape's attention. She finished her dinner like it tasted of wax. Secretly, she welcomed the extra potions practice. Standing opposite Snape always turned pleasure into torment. At 8 in the evening, she'd already spent half an hour processing ingredients and another half hour quietly learning, though she wouldn't call it stealing knowledge. From the moment she entered the dungeon classroom, Snape had been laconic, wordless. His instructions came in gestures and glances. Speaking to Ada would have seemed a desecration. So the two who disliked each other coexisted in grim silence. The only sounds were Ada chopping and sorting, and Snape stirring and muttering to himself over the cauldrons. As her skill with raw materials improved, she could pay more attention to Snape. Watching a potions master work up close was a rare education. She didn't understand all his techniques, but she learned a great deal. Near curfew, Snape told her to stop. While putting her tools away, Ada surprised herself by asking, "Professor, do you know about the Ravenclaw theft?" Snape crossed his arms. "I do," he said flatly. "What are your thoughts?" Ada chose her words carefully, hoping not to provoke him. "What's it to you?" Snape replied. "You may leave." Ada wasn't surprised. Snape never gave anything for free. She finished tidying and headed for the door, but when her hand touched the handle, he gave her the evening's longest sentence. "Miss Tryst, if you do not wish to encounter me more often, return promptly to your common room and stay there. I do not care to see you in the corridors or in the second-floor girls' lavatory."